you. Good evening. Wait, oh, we're still pre-live. Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 6 o'clock, 6:01. And with great respect and humility, I want we acknowledge and honor the lands of the Snuneymuxw people. The Snuneymuxw people maintain their profound, unique, and spiritual connection to the land through ages, traditions, teachings, stewardship, and expressions of reciprocity. I'd like to acknowledge also that a few of us are joining this meeting from Sinawas and Staminas, and also the contributions of the Métis people to our district. Do we have any additions, deletions, or changes in order to tonight's agenda? And yes, Trustee Higginson.
Thank you, Chair. Item number 11.1 is actually supposed to appear under 8.2. So if we could just strike 11.1 and know that that letter will be discussed under 8.2, please.
Yes, I've got that in my notes. So with given that adjustment, and I'm hoping there would be no problems with that, if I could have a motion to approve the agenda, please. So moved, Trustee Higginson. Moved by Trustee Higginson. Oh, seconded by Trustee Stanley. Seeing no objections, the agenda is approved. And now a motion to approve the minutes, please, that the minutes of Education Committee meeting held April 6, 2022 be approved. Charlene. And seconded by Stephanie, if that's okay. Okay, thank you. All right, no presentations tonight. We do have senior staff reports. Item 8.1. Zayed Merchant. I'm sorry, Zayed, I'm messing up your last name. As our Director of IT, and Don Belcom, our Assistant Superintendent, will be speaking to us tonight about ETAG, which is the Educational Technology Advisory Group for 2021-2022. And I will hand the meeting to you now.
Thank you, and through the chair, I will invite Zayed on to speak to the goings-ons of ETAG, and then we're happy to take questions.
Good morning, trustees. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Pleased to be on this on the agenda today, and thank you for inviting me to speak about ETAG. Trustees, you have the information sheet in front of you. I also did receive a couple of questions as a heads up, and I'll speak to some of those right now, and also maybe add a couple of things and be available for any further questions. So ETAG, I've been with ETAG for about 2.5 years now. ETAG has a long history in the school district. It's been had a history of being central in the governance of the way educational technology has actually been selected and deployed and implemented in schools. The purpose and scope of ETAG is very much educational technology and how it's being used in the classrooms for instruction, for learning as well. Some of the points that I made in the information sheet, you can see that ETAG has been hugely influential over time, especially at a time when it was the center of innovation through technology, and you had a core group of very forward tech savvy and people with a large amount of intent on advocacy for bringing and introducing technology in the realm of teaching and learning. So major directions in technology were introduced through the influence of ETAG, like the cloud-based Google Classroom product. It's been quite revolutionizing in teaching in classrooms. There's been they've been influential in doing things like the Wi-Fi upgrade, one of the biggest IT capital investment projects in the history of the district, as a matter of fact. And I did have a couple of questions about, hey, where are we with Wi-Fi? And I thought I'd just bring a couple of things over. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation for everyone, but I do have a couple of slides I'd like to just give you some visuals. This isn't a Wi-Fi project update meeting. I don't have the latest numbers. We can do that through, we do that through updates through to senior leadership on a regular basis, especially with the financial aspect of it. But this is a major initiative that the board has been super supportive of, and I want to just cover that a little bit. So where are we with, I'm just going to quickly share a screen here. Where are we with the Wi-Fi project? Just give me 1 second here. And I'll share a screen. If you can just give me a thumbs up if you can see that in the room. Great. Okay, so really high level status of where we are with Wi-Fi upgrades throughout the district. You will see that I have broken this down to 3 major phases. There's a lot more detail buried within these phases, but we have some pre-planning column, which every site in our district has gone through a pre-planning. And this is actually the planning, the process that gave us the estimations on scheduling and budgetary for predictions over the span of this multi-year program. This column here, work in progress. These are all the. I'll work backwards here. We've got all the projects, all the schools that actually have completed their Wi-Fi upgrade are listed here in green. So there's a number of those. We targeted high schools first with the idea that knowing this is going to be a multi-year project, we want to make sure that the largest number of students were captured in the fastest amount of time. And by targeting high schools first, we knew they would capture the students before they left the system. We also know that high schools are where technology is used the most widely and most frequently by students and teachers. And we've got a work in progress column here. As you can see, we're well underway. This work in progress can be anything from we've done site surveys, we've done, or we've actually in the schools doing wiring. So that's where we are with the Wi-Fi upgrade status. Now, I think it'd be nice to hear every once in a while. So what is this doing for us in schools? And rather than me telling you how amazing the Wi-Fi upgrade has been for schools, I posed this to some of the schools that actually, or all the schools that actually did have that have enjoyed their upgrade in the last couple of years. This is the question I asked: how has the infrastructure and Wi-Fi upgrade in your school improved connectivity and access to technology in your school? And in what ways has it made an impact to learning, teaching, productivity, and/or operations? I got a number of good feedback, all positive feedback, as a matter of fact. I just thought quickly highlight some of them for you here. Senior Secondary, Pleasant Valley, some of the comments highlighted. Access in each classroom has been successful in increase the use of technology overall by teachers. Please excuse me if I read some of this stuff. I just want to make sure that it does hit home. We even have it stretch a little outside in our building, which is great for outdoor learning opportunities. Here we've got so nice to not have learning plans interrupted or changed due to Wi-Fi issues. Next one from Wellington Secondary, a lot of feedback here, some of the key points. Staff now have the ability to reliably access technology to support their instruction in the classroom. Students can now use their personal technologies to support their own learning as well. And we've got improvements in opportunities for teachers to dive more deeply into curriculum topics, a variety of media sources, and it positively impacts student learning. Oh, I've got ownership here. With the continued support from our trustees and district staff, I feel I can share a huge thank you from our school for all the efforts in making success for students our main focus. Dover Bay. This actually speaks a little bit to what problem we were actually trying to address. We were hesitant in the before world to plan any activities like provincial assessments on any device that required Wi-Fi. So we had to displace classes so these could be done in labs with hardwired computer stations. The challenge of absence of infrastructure Wi-Fi was actually quite stark before these upgrades. And it's really hard not to underestimate how tough life was in schools trying to even adopt technology. This one here kind of sums it all quite nicely. Technology had become a dirty word that generated howls of bitter, sneering laughter in the lunchroom. Students and parents knew the truth as well. Soon the questions became undeniably public. Why invest in more mobile technology if we lack the infrastructure to use it? This was an important point, and the reason we actually decided that we were going to spend a large amount of our technology investment in making sure that the investments we would continue to make in increasing the device to student ratios and infusing more technology and bringing on digital platforms, all those many of those investments we're not deriving the value from them without the underlying technology, the infrastructure that was needed to actually make them work. So I love this here. Before the upgrade, Chromebook and laptop cards sat unused, gathering dust. Now that Wi-Fi has become rock solid, reliable, teachers are clamoring to book our mobile tech in unprecedented numbers. So in a nutshell, Barsby has been lifted out of the Wi-Fi dark ages into a tech renaissance, and Wi-Fi is here loud and proud. And I do have some more some more feedback, which I'm actually going to archive and post and share with everyone that's interested. So continuing the discussion about ETAG, ETAG is an advisory group. It doesn't have the formality of a committee. It doesn't have decision-making power. It is one of the many avenues or sources of advice, of feedback, and excellent channel of communication between the educators and the educating community inside that team and the people that they and the schools that they represent. And if you, as you remember from the information sheet, we've got principals in ETAG, we've got teachers from elementary and secondary, we've got representatives from inclusive education, we've got DPAC in there as well, of course, IT and leadership from learning services as well. One of the things that this is a commentary on my part here, and I look back at some of the minutes and the agendas of the ETAG as they've gone through, as they've evolved through the years. The single source, one of the single sources of education technology advice used to come from ETAG. It continues to provide advice, an advisory role to the district. But and one of the things I'm really impressed about with this district, the influence no longer comes from a core group of techno-savvy people. We've got amazing levels of digital literacy, digital advocacy from all groups in our organization, from teachers who are not even part of ETAG, from the learning coordinator group or center of innovation there. We've got amazing digital literacy and advocacy amongst our senior staff and senior leadership. We've got many areas of sources of really good advice and knowledge to help guide the technology investments and the direction technology that leads us, leads the department and leads the district. And we also had some questions on, and I know that some of these questions will come up today. We had questions about, you know, do we have about the laptop program that we actually did cover in the information sheet? Yes, ETAG, as well as a number of other sources suggested that a laptop to every teacher was one of the things that was going to was essential for technology use inside the district in learning and instruction. We've met the target of providing every teacher with a laptop. So every teacher that has a 0.5 assignment or higher gets a laptop without question now. And the laptop doesn't actually belong in the school. It belongs with the teacher. We've made measures to make sure that teachers do feel a sense of ownership with that device. That they get to use it, you know, even when they're on break, even when they're in the evenings, because and we found incidentally that things like the sense of ownership and the care that's actually exercised in these laptops has taken a dramatic increase. So people love the fact that they've got their own technology and are trusted with that device as well. We've got questions about what kind of educational software for teachers are provided. So we've got a number of software platforms that are used in the district. We've got the Google Classroom that's used for curriculum delivery. Now we've got My Education BC, the provincial student information system that's used for all things education, including things like communicating student learning and for progress reporting for our grades 8 to 12. IT works very closely with learning services and always has in developing and enhancing software tools for assessment and for report cards and reporting, and we continue to do that. We have dedicated staff supporting the use of MyEd and some of these other in-house tools. We've got resources like documentation, online knowledge bases. We do learning events. There's Pro-D. There's things like EdTech kits that the learning coordinator group actually develops and has available for sign up by teachers that can often comes with instruction and training on how to use them and introduce them into their classrooms. We've got online resources like Communities Share Ed BC is a very new resource that all teachers have access to. We've got the Focused Education, the consortium that our district belongs to, that has an amazing amount of resources on digital technology and on digital learning resources as well. And yeah, so that's the ETAG. We see a long life in ETAG. We love the fact that we have new faces coming in to the group every year. We also like the fact that we've got some anchor members who really enjoy their engagement with the IT department, other areas, other departments that actually tend to direct the direction of technology in the district as well. That's it for me. I hope I've answered some of your questions, but I'm happy to, between me and Don, answer any more questions.
Sorry guys, my mouse froze and then I couldn't get on here. Stephanie.
Thanks, Sayed. It's really nice to see you. And I actually have just a quick comment to say thank you for incorporating our questions so well, and to use the newly coined phrases that we like to hear a lot here. I think that was an excellent balance of the satellite data and the street data. And I really appreciated seeing where you're at in the planning process, as well as hearing the feedback. The quotes were really meaningful. And I also think it's funny, when you're typing these questions, they make sense in your head. And I read it again. I said, oh my goodness, number one, looks like I didn't read the report, but you actually understood what I meant when I was trying to type the question. So thank you for that chart that showed where we were at and which schools were prioritized and why. I really appreciate it. So I just want to say thanks for being able to understand the context of my questions when they weren't very clear. Thanks.
All right, and Jessica, question.
Hi. Yeah, great news on the Wi-Fi updates. Thank you. My kids were saying things of mentioned the comments that you had mentioned about why bother having devices if the Wi-Fi doesn't work. So, and that was a while ago. So it's great to see the progress that's been made and continuing to be made. It's reassuring. My questions are more about the committee. So Zayad, I'm not sure if it should go to you or the other group that we see on Zoom there. Hi. And I'm trying to understand what the scope of the committee is. Specifically looking more at the psychological aspects of technology. So does the committee discuss things like positive and negative impacts of technology in the classroom and on student well-being?
Maybe I'll start with that one. So I'd like to start off by thanking Zayed for the presentation. I think he did a good job, as you said, of balancing out some of the infrastructure piece, but also some of the work that ETAG advisory group does. One of the interesting things over the years, as Zayed has pointed out, is that the committee's gone from being kind of the pinnacle of the people who understand technology in the district to more of one of bringing together our stakeholders into a conversation around technology. And Zayed's super excited about being in those conversations, because it allows him to go back to his department and prioritize what's important. And so you can tell that, you know, the infrastructure of Wi-Fi was the driver number one. Everything else had to flow from, we have connectivity around that. An example, we don't talk so much about psychological impacts of technology at ETAG. That is more of a learning services conversation, inclusive education conversation, comes through the school counselors. Like, that's kind of where that originates. But we do talk about a lot about things like what types of technology end users are the best for kids, and how do we filter those. And so I think back, you know, 20, 25 years ago, what resources were in front of or available to teachers with students. It was paper-based. You know, resources had to be approved, and then you could use them in the classroom. Well, with YouTube and all kinds, there's an app every day that does something for educational wise. That's flooding towards ETAG as a, what should we do with this? And Zayed and his team take care of the security piece and the privacy piece, and the learners, the teachers on that ETAG are the ones who are saying, this is what we think that that app or that website or that account that we want students to be able to participate in. This is the learning side of it. So we do talk about the impact on learning, but something like psychological safety or, you know, the use of technology or screen time is not something that ETAG really has the purview on.
All right, follow up, Jess.
Yes, thank you. So thanks, Dawn, for the clarification, but I'm a little confused still, which is I'll tell you what I'm wondering about, because I actually kind of feel like I'm falling in between those two pieces. And I'm thinking specifically about the mounting evidence and like the consistent evidence indicating harm associated with like social media, smartphones, and particular gaming sites that are, you know, they're designed using psychological addiction knowledge, right? So we're using these technology, we're using the technology in the classroom. Sometimes we've encouraged it by doing like, what is it called, Kahoot, or other things. And I feel increasingly uncomfortable in the sense that, you know, we have this mounting evidence of challenges or problems that we need to look at, but yet the technology got ahead of us. And, you know, we haven't really thought about healthy use or guidelines around that. And so that's kind of the root of my question is that where would it fall for the school district to look at like digital use guidelines and like responsible and healthy use of portable devices, not only from a student well-being perspective, but from a classroom functioning perspective, because the, you know, interruption and distraction factor is another question. So, you know, I don't know, you know, is that the scope within this committee, or would you, you know, direct me to ask that question somewhere else? Or I guess, how can we have that conversation?
That's a great question. It's a huge topic. It is. It's not really an ETAG conversation. It's just because it's too big of a conversation. So the part around screen time and digital safety and stuff is a little bit around ETAG, because we do talk about, you know, user login and guest use and tracking information. So if a student sends something through a device that are logged on at school, and that aspect of it. But if I think of a teacher who is really heavily into tech use at class, they lots of screen time in all of the positive learning ways. Students are at school for 25 hours a week. So the most you would see is a student kind of spending half their day on screen, and the teacher is really tech savvy and active. So we're talking 12 hours of screen time at school. Out of 160 hours in a week, that student might spend 50, 60, 70 hours of screen time. So screen time is a huge issue, because they're on screen time, social media before school, they're on social media after school, evenings, weekends. They get woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning with cyberbullying and harassment. They're connecting with people that we're worried about halfway around the world. There's all kinds of digital safety issues, and it's taught at school. So teachers do address digital safety, but it's the issue is so much larger for students. And you're right, we're way behind it, right? As soon as technology comes along, by the time we figure out the healthy uses for it, all of the dangerous things are already bumping up against us. So it's a big topic. It's part of ETAG, but it's not it's beyond ETAG. It's a bigger conversation for us.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to throw out a quick question because it's along these lines, and then Naomi, I'm going to put you on the list. I see you on the list. So, and maybe Charlene, Chair McKay, you and I want to talk about this later, and you can direct me that way if you think. If we wanted to go deeper into this topic, where would be the best way to do that? Would that be at, I would like to get maybe hopefully partner input, so I wouldn't necessarily want to do it at a board meeting. I like to do it committee. So would that be another education topic? Could you foresee that? And I would.
My suggestion would be that you take a look at the plan through agenda setting.
Okay.
I think this year is fully planned for this year. So I would refer the topic to be considered when the board does its annual work plan for next year to dig into the educational aspects of technology.
Thank you.
Scope and sequence, that type of thing. The learning related connections to students, not just the equipment relations.
Thank you.
Would be my suggestion.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And having heard that, I will put that in the back of my mind, and I will hand it over to you, Naomi.
Thank you very much for that informative presentation. I have a comment and a question, and my comment is just a big thank you for all the work that you have done to upgrade Wi-Fi. I was delighted to see the comments myself too, because I can recall pulling my hair out when I planned a lesson using Google Classroom as well as different websites, and we would spend a half an hour waiting for our pages to load up, and then the bell was ringing. So I can imagine how much the teachers are feeling very relieved, because like Jessica was going to say, it's a losing battle. What you're, I think, talking about is very important, but when the ministry brought in the new curriculum, they also announced they weren't going to be giving, initially weren't going to be giving any funding for resources, so teachers were going to have to rely on technology to, there wasn't going to be new textbooks, for example, for social studies and all that sort of stuff. So we had no choice but to move to technology to support our teaching. So I'm very grateful for the work that's been done. My question is, with the ETAG team, like, who's comprised of this team that is doing all this work?
Through you, Chair, Trustee Bailey, are you asking about who comprises ETAG itself?
Yes.
Okay, so we've got our well, we attempt to bring in stakeholder groups and to make sure that everyone's represented. So we've got teachers from elementary and secondary. We've got principals, elementary and secondary. We've got teacher librarians. We've got learning. Often we have a learning coordinator. We've always had a learning coordinator, at least one or two, if not two. We've got the DPAC president. We've got the Departments of Learning Services and IT. So that will be, to this year, Don Belcombe, Assistant Superintendent, and myself.
Okay, great. That was just what I wanted to know. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for around ETAG? Greg.
Sorry, I was having trouble pressing buttons. So through the chair to Zayad or other staff. So thank you for all your work in upgrading the Wi-Fi. It looks like we're making great progress. We're moving down to about 50%, I think it said in the report. Curious to know, obviously, when we upgrade technology, there's other things that have to go into it to support that technology. And, you know, because this is such a monumental task with the number of facilities that we're looking at, what's the big picture as we move forward, and the question is kind of where are we going from a technology perspective in education?
Through you, Chair, I'll just answer Trustee Keller. This will actually give me an opportunity to say something that I didn't at the beginning. This is not an IT project. The district infrastructure upgrade program is actually a classic and a successful case of a cross-departmental projects. We've got facilities involved. In fact, facilities project manages the project because it's largely a lot of the work and the scheduling is based on a construction aspect. So we've got, the wiring is the biggest piece of it. And of course, IT is there making sure that the design the design is adequate, that the actual selection of the devices and the architecture is as well. So district IT is involved in commissioning the actual devices and the Wi-Fi, managing that, but facilities and the operations group, electricians, we've got full-time staff actually dedicated to the wiring project as well. So this project was essentially addressing a huge deficit in infrastructure. The recognition was that you really can't do anything with collaborative platforms, with devices, with enabling technology and integrating it into teaching practice, with enabling operations, with modernizing your communications, like moving from old style analog digital phones to VoIP-based phones without the actual underlying technology. So it's very, very basic and huge. One of the commitments that we are also going to make sure that we try and introduce is an ongoing evergreening of the infrastructure, so we don't find ourselves again in 15 years so far behind like we did on this that was really spurned this project. So there's an ongoing maintenance that's required as well. And once that's done, and as that's happening, we are able to start introducing far more advanced and complex technologies that are driven not just by the need and the desire to have technology, but driven by intentional use of technology and how it improves education and learning, how it improves teaching practice, and how it improves operations. Which is one of the things that I tried to stress earlier is it's not ETAG necessarily, it's the sole source of that expertise and that subject matter expertise. Technology is now pervasive. You need to have technology experts in almost every department and every area of your organization. And that's really what drives the future use of technology, is that digital literacy and the recognition that there's opportunity to do things better. I hope I've answered some of that question. So the future of technology is a question that is hard for anyone to answer, but we want to make sure it's intentional and driven by purpose and expected outcomes. Thank
you. Do you have a follow-up, Greg?
Yeah, if I may, through the chair.
Yes.
So thank you, Zayad. I guess maybe my follow-up might be, as we move from school to school, obviously there's a planning phase and a construction implementation phase. Are we, or do we have some kind of standard that we've applied across the district, or is each school different?
So, through you, Chair, speaking directly in response to or related to the actual question about infrastructure. So in terms of the infrastructure, yes, we actually established a standard target of what that Wi-Fi and what that infrastructure would actually entail. So for example, the number of cable drops in every classroom, the type of cabling. So there's categories of cabling that are out there, so we've targeted specific category levels, the number of drops. We've considered things like, where will the projector end up being in 3 or 4 years or 5 years? We want to make sure that there's a little network drop that's situated in all areas where that might be possible. And there's an AC outlet as well. We'll do things like making sure that there's some power, sufficient power provided for the eventual, or perhaps sometime in the near future, a consideration for introducing BYOD. We can't entertain BYOD, for example, unless there is Wi-Fi infrastructure, unless there is adequate charging stations, in the classrooms for kids to actually recharge their batteries. We look at things like the next generation of Wi-Fi equipment. They're talking about Wi-Fi 7 now. Do we have the actual access points? Have we selected the right architecture? to make sure that we are always not constraining ourselves from improvements in that technology and being forced to change architectures and vendors and products and things like that. So there's a great deal involved in selecting that design that goes into that standard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry,
All right,
Chair,
I
can I have
see
myself
no-
back to the list again? I have one more
Yes.
question.
You may. Just, is there any other, are there any other questions before I allow Greg to ask his next question? You can either comment in the chat or turn on your screen. Okay, Greg?
Thank you. So through the chair, my other question, just in relation to the actual service that's provided to our facilities. So obviously, upgrading the Wi-Fi is only going to be as good as the service that's delivered to our building. So I have no idea what it is. So can you maybe explain to us a little bit about, perhaps, is the service coming into all of our facilities of such speed that we're going to expect to see an improvement, or are there things the board could be doing to, for example, install fiber if that hasn't been done, or I don't know, I'm not a IT professional, but to do work that would enhance the incoming service levels?
Perhaps, Chair, I could start, and if Mr.
Yes,
Mitchell
please.
wants to add to that. So this is one of those areas that it's important, I think, to reflect on the successes of our partners. And so just want to reflect on the amazing work that the Ministry of Education did to ensure equitable access to the quality, high-speed services into the buildings. And then it's up to us to get it to our classrooms, which the board is doing. But through upgrades over the last, well, I guess they were done probably 5 years ago. But essentially, I think internet access was viewed as a basic requirement in education, and the Provincial Minister of Education did an excellent job providing high quality Wi-Fi to essentially every school in the province. We do actually give them money back for that. It's lessening as the project gets done, but board's not going to be asked to contribute any additional to that to make it any better. And maybe Zayad, if you want to add to that, but just to recognize our ministry partners.
Yeah, I'll only add that in addition to the architecture that was selected for school internet access, so we're talking about actually bandwidth available to the internet from schools. That's based on a ministry formula, but it's always changing. So it's monitored. The utilization that's allocated to schools is always monitored. Everyone knows that technology use is increasing, and the ministry responds with those kinds of increases. So it's not static. There was a time when the lack of bandwidth was actually one of the things that really prevented me from investing in things like Wi-Fi and technology, because the bandwidth wasn't there, but it's no longer the case.
Okay, thank you. And I see, you don't have a follow-up, do you, Greg?
No, that was great. Thank you very much.
Okay, and now I see Charlene has a question.
Thank you. My question is somewhat related to the question that Greg just asked, and it is for either the superintendent or the secretary treasurer. Recognizing that there's been a lot of work done in the city of Nanaimo in particular around bringing in fiber optic infrastructure into the city. It's not complete across the city yet, but I'm wondering if there's any staff to staff discussions that happen for support for projects like that. In my opinion, I think if we saw more the physical infrastructure within the city to be increased, to see more of that fiber optics throughout the city, it would actually better benefit our facilities. So I'm just wondering if there's any of those conversations that have been had to date.
Perhaps I can start, and maybe Zayad can correct me but my understanding is that's one of the areas where there's not necessarily a lot of overlap, because our fiber is going to be predominantly that provincial program that's providing equitable access. One area that we are working with them on, though, however, is associated with communications. And so I think everyone is aware that the north end of Nanaimo has some of the worst cellular reception in the area, which is actually a safety issue at some of our schools if we're trying to connect. And so we are trying to work together to encourage better access, better service for our cellular connection. With respect to the fiber itself, Zayad, is there any overlaps that you could think of?
There have been some initial fairly high-level discussions about potential benefits that partners might enjoy from a collaborative effort on fiber optics. The city, I know, has been at the drawing board looking at options on getting fiber into the city and getting partners on board. There hasn't been a ton of actual traction to the point of actual execution or even some kind of a time frame, because there are some obstacles like where do you actually run the fiber optic cable across the water, and there's access issues amongst the port and things like that. But nothing to really report on right now. That the benefits that we've been looking at are things like, well, what if we wanted a disaster recovery location? What if we wanted a high-speed bandwidth, pipe between location A and B just for disaster recovery and for a redundant location should a disaster, physical disaster actually occur. But again, quite high level and nothing really nothing substantial enough to actually get our hopes up too high about.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
A follow-up, or is that what you're looking for? Okay, thank you. Jessica.
Hi, thank you. BOYD was mentioned, and I don't know, Zayad, if that was just a comment with regards to capacity. My question is more about if that is an intention or plan, or so is BYOD, so bring your own device for if anyone's watching, is that a desired goal that's been discussed?
Yes, it has been discussed. We have frequently discussed BYOD. We've never really moved much further because we know that the constraint has been our infrastructure, preventing us from, creating a BYOD plan without the actual infrastructure to say, yeah, bring your device, but there ain't no Wi-Fi here, right? But yes, there are so many potential advantages of BYOD that are recognized, in terms of, in terms of just being able to provide the type of technology and the type of access that students and staff would like to use, and allowing that to maybe create a formula that allows us to provide more equitable access to technology by people who can't necessarily afford to bring their own devices. But there's a lot of prerequisites required to make sure that BYOD is a real thing, and there's some things that we want to make sure that we are prepared for. In truth, Trustee Stanley, most students are bringing their own technology to schools, and I say most, not scientifically. I think that's just anecdotally. We know the numbers. We know how many personal devices are connecting to the network, and we know that many of them belong to students. And we also know from all of our school stakeholders and principals and teachers that those devices are frequently being used for learning and for instruction, right? So there is a place for it. We're going to make sure that when we do discuss BYOD and plan, it'll be again intentional and also covers and mitigates the risks associated with BYOD. Right?
So if I can follow up,
Yes, I was just going to ask you.
Thanks. So I have to say I'm grateful that the infrastructure doesn't allow that, because I'm not a fan, and from a parent perspective, you know, I'm the parent that didn't let my kid have a cell phone as long as possible because, you know, to the bane of my children's existence, I know the psychological research on the impacts. And so I think things that would absolutely need to be discussed in evaluating that obviously would be the digital use guidelines for healthy and responsible use, and parent concern or support / concern. You know, a couple of number of parents have talked to me about, you know, feeling forced to have their kids have phones and that they were really opposed to it. So just, I mean, obviously we're not there now, but it sounds like, as Dawn said, this is a really big conversation. And so I guess if we're intending to go there, I hope we start the conversation sooner rather than later. Thank you, though. That's good information.
Through the chair, if I may just add, it is a great conversation to have, and with Zayed's team, our request around BYOD is, one is, do we have the capacity to do it? And then do we have the capacity to do it in a safe way, in a controlled way? So on the really positive side, we have students who are excited to go into the computer industry. They've invested a lot of money in their own technology. They have software that will allow them to do things that we would never purchase for school district software. We would love them to be able to bring their own device, do high-end editing and graphic designs, and go into the industry. So on the upside of things, we want to support that. On the negative side, we want to be able to control that we don't just have unlimited access for students to come in and be on their cell phones, you know, nonstop. So it's this control thing, and it's a support thing, and it's a big topic. And some districts have kind of jumped in with BYOD without doing their due diligence and have suffered for it. And I think we're doing it in a very thoughtful and controlled way. I appreciate Zayed. His answer is always, if it's good for kids, we'll work on a way to make it happen, but knowing that there are those mitigating factors as well. So.
Sorry, do you have a follow-up there, Jessica? No? Okay.
Yes. I think I already took advantage of my follow-up. I could
Fair
go
enough.
on all day, but I'll have some boundaries
here. Fair enough. Stephanie.
Thank you. And I think this is more to the learning services team, but perhaps Zayed, you have some thoughts on this too. I really do think that this conversation about appropriate use is something that we really should start to prioritize. I just actually looked up the appropriate use of school district information technology, and it appears from a staffing perspective, it hasn't been updated since 2010. And it's about as benign as it comes. It's like, does not contravene federal or provincial legislation or common law. And I think that, you know, as a parent, I have a child who gets to play video games when they complete their work. And then I also have teachers who tell me that my kids are rushing through their work because we limit screen time in our house. And so there are like real consequences to this stuff and the real impacts on kids learning. I also have a child who told me one year at Thanksgiving that he hadn't held a pencil yet because they did everything on the Chromebook. And when I talked to the teacher about it, I was told, well, it's okay. When they're our age, they won't need to hold pencils. They won't need to handwrite. Well, they're going to need to fill out a job application when they're 15. And it's going to need to be legible. So I think that this actually is something that we need to find some time to prioritize, and to the Chair McKay's point that perhaps it's for the work plan for next year. But I actually think this is a very real problem as we talk about the implementation of increasing and improving the use of technology in schools. You know, my own son, his phone time when I manage his screen time, when I look at it, his screen time is at school. And I constantly hear from the teachers about how distracted he is by his phone at school. So I think there's a real opportunity for us to help make sure that as we're improving the connectivity of our students, that we're also making sure that all the staff and the students are able to help do this in a good way that actually improves student learning and isn't distracting.
Okay. Any comments to that or responses to that?
I'll just respond that I agree it's a big topic, and it's probably something that we should look forward on the workflow going forward, because we could definitely spend a lot more time on this topic.
And I think I would just add, and also teaching just starting young to teach kid healthy habits and boundaries and how to recognize when you're maybe getting a little too addicted to your phone. Yeah. So as you said, it's a longer conversation and it's something for the work plan for the future. But I'm glad that we've, if I was going to make a pun and say tagged it tonight, but I'm glad that it's been brought up, because it's been something that's been on my mind too for quite a while. So I want to thank you, Zayed, and I want to thank you, Dawn, for this conversation and your reports. I don't see anybody else in the chat wanting to speak, so I'm going to suggest that we move on to the next item on our agenda. Department of Learning Services. I'm going to now turn the meeting over to Tim, who will introduce our speakers, and we're going to be we're now on item 8.2, FSA results.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tanya, and through you, Madam Chair. Just on this topic here regarding FSA results, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Jackie Poulin, Director of Instruction for Learning and Innovation within the Department of Learning Services. And as you have seen on the screen, the team is present and supporting Jackie just with any questions that may arise. I'll also point out that Director Bartlett is also in the other room and prepared to answer questions as well, should they come up. So at that, I'll turn it over to Director Poulin. Thank you.
Good evening. As you can see, I'm here tonight to just give you some updates on the FSA, in particular to this year. I'd like to start off by providing just a bit of a picture of the current landscape of the FSA. In 2017-18, the FSA was updated to reflect the content and competencies of the revised BC curriculum. Also, the timing of the administration of the assessment was moved from the spring to the fall. For this reason, the ministry has asked and recommended that FSA data prior to 2017 is not compared to anything that we have after it. Looking at this chart, you'll see that 2018 and 2019 are what we would now refer to as typical years from an FSA administration perspective, as the FSA would have been administered in the fall of the 2019-2020, so the students then would not have yet been impacted by the pandemic that hit our province later that year. The FSA that was administered in 2021 was postponed twice. In the end, it was administered in February and March of 2021 in the midst of COVID. Again, direction from the ministry has been that due to the irregular time of the administration and the much lower than usual participation rates all the way across the province, is it not advisable to compare these results to any previous or future assessments. This year, for the 2021-22 FSA, there was another change to the structure of the assessment. There is no longer a separate writing and reading components. The FSA now consists of only 2 components rather than 3, literacy and numeracy. As a result of this change, another recommendation from the ministry is indicating that it is not advisable to compare literacy results of the 2021-22 FSA to either reading or writing results from the previous FSA assessment. I wanted to provide this landscape just to give a context to the data that I'll be sharing in the coming slides and why trends over time and cohort data is not quite as here as a large extent as you may have liked. Going to start off with participation rates. The participation rates of FSA are an important factor in how valid and reliable the data is, both for formative use in a school and for the larger district reflection. It is also important to note, when participation rates are low in a classroom and or a school, the level of engagement for all of those students that are still writing will be impacted, no matter how the assessment is presented. The rates shown here are a blend of the reading and writing and numeracy or literacy participation rates at each grade level over the past 5 years for our grade 4s and our grade 7s. You'll be able to see, so I've just looked at the 5 years since the revision. And as you can note in the data, we had been seeing a very gradual increase in participation over a few years, up to 2019, where we were back up to almost 75% of our students participating. Our participation then dropped quite significantly in 2020-21 to 55% for grade 4 and 47% in grade 7. This was during the peak of COVID and the postponed timelines. This year, we saw a very gradual increase coming back up, but still only hitting 62% for our grade 4s and 58% for grade 7. a very low participation. And again, I'm going to stress that when you have a lower participation, it is more challenging to engage the students that are participating in the writing. Just going to create one more look at participation rates and have a graph that compares our NLPS participation to the provincial participation rates. As you can see on the graph, we came very, very close to being on par with the provincial participation rates in 2019 and 2020. In fact, on the grade 4 graph, it's almost hard to distinguish the difference between the two. Then we had a very significant decline in 2020-21, and we've continued to be significantly below provincial participation levels again this year. One thing to note, that the low participation rates does create lower validity. In fact, you'll note in 2020-21, the ministry recommends not using that data because the participation rates were down around 67 or 64%. So they didn't recommend using it when that data was lower, and yet we're still not back up to that participation rate even this year yet. Despite our low participation rates, I do want to make sure that we're presenting the data for this past year. As noted on the opening slide, we do not have a great deal of cumulative data due to the revisions to the assessment, COVID, and then the shift from reading and writing to literacy. Here's the data for our grade 4 students for this year. Please note that this data represents the 62.3% of students who completed the FSA. So this data only shows those students who actually wrote. The on-track bar references students who would be developing and proficient. These two categories are collated together when the data is provided both back to the parent, school, and to the district. As per the ministry recommendation, I have not provided trends over time, but we'll have some other comparisons coming up. Here's the data for our grade 7 students for this year. And again, please note that this data represents the 58.3% of students who completed the FSA this year. That center bar again is for our on-track students, which is the ones that are in the developing and proficient. And then you of course have the ones on the extending as well. I did want to share the data for our grade 4 students as compared to the provincial scores. The district score is in the blue, the provincial score is in the orange. To help just create a bit of a context, please note that the participation rate for the province in grade 4 was 73%, which was 11% higher than our district. So it is hard to compare when we have such different levels of participation. And here's the data for our grade 7 students as compared to the provincial scores. Again, our district data is in blue and the provincial score is in the orange. The difference between the participation rate for the province was 71.6 for our grade 7s, which was 13% higher than our district. As the district, as they only provided to us with the number of students who did participate, we did take the information to provide a graph to demonstrate if we looked at all of our grade 4 students, what percentage of students that did not write versus the ones that did write and where they scored. So the gray areas on this pie chart represents the number of students that we do not have any FSA data for. So you can see for grade 4, it's 37.7% of our students that we have no FSA data for. And then the other sections, again, where the orange is emerging, the green is on track, and the yellow is extending. You see the same data for our grade 7s. You'll note the same thing, only the percentage of students, we get pretty darn close with almost half of that bar chart, looking quite close to our students that we do not have any of the FSA data for. One of the more effective reflections of the data is to take a look at cohort data. This looks at the same group of students who would have written in grade 4 and then again in grade 7. Although it may not be the exact same students, it does represent the same group and would have a large portion of the same students. This is a cohort group. You'll note that I've only have it for numeracy and only for the 2018-19 grade 4s who then wrote again in 2021-22. Because of the changes in the structure of the reading and writing and then to literacy, we're not able to pull the cohort data in literacy for this group. And because of COVID, we don't have the cohort data in the other areas for numeracy either. So the cohort group here on the light green are this group of students that would have written this numeracy assessment in their grade 4. And then the dark green is the same group of students or a similar group of students who would have written it in their grade 7 year. I have to say that I was actually pleasantly surprised to see that we had our numbers go up and extending, and that we held on in regards to on track, and that although we didn't see the bar in emerging go down like we would have hoped, this also is a group of students that would have been significantly impacted by the pandemic, because they would have had 2 full years of various interruptions to their learning and remote. So just the fact that we were able to keep them on track for that length of time is encouraging. We certainly are looking forward to being able to look at more cohort data in the future years as the assessment stays consistent, and we will be able to look at year to year. So just in summary, we do need to have a more engaged participation for the FSSA data to be more valid for our district, but we can always take a look at it and see what it does tell us. We do, of course, use it against many other formative assessments done at the school and class level to guide our instruction. We'll be continuing to look at cohort data analysis moving forward where possible. And of course, once the assessment tool stays consistent and we hopefully don't have any other major disruptions, we'll be looking at trends over time. We also are continuing to work on a system that makes the report card data more easily accessible in a manner that allows us to look at both trends and cohorts. This is something that we've spoken to a number of times and will continue to work on. And the conversations that continue at the school, where teachers and administrators reflect on what their student needs are each year, will continue. We do know, of course, based on the data we have, that we need to continue moving forward, supporting literacy and numeracy in our district for all of our students. Thank you.
Are there any questions at this point? Yes, I see you, Charlene.
Thank you. I'm drawing a conclusion. So I'd like to run what I think I'm seeing or potentially what I'm thinking of to see if it makes sense. I'm thinking about those students who in grade 7 did not write their FSA, say this year. So the next potential time that I might be able to look at a provincial level piece of data is not until they write their numeracy assessment in grade 10. Am I correct in that?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So I'll close with a comment to the board, to my colleagues on the board. I find it concerning that there's almost 40% of kids right now in grade 7 that I don't know what their numeracy skills are, because when they move into grade 8, that transition is so difficult to move into high school, all of the pieces that come with that. And if their skills aren't there and we don't know it, then how are we supposed to know how to help them? And so I know it's just one piece of data, but it does feel like an important piece of data that we need. And I think that when we want to be able to look at these numbers and say, how do I help the kids that are on the end of emerging, say with numeracy, because we won't know for 3 more years if they're okay or not, which potentially could be too late and impact their graduation, which is our ultimate goal. We need to stop standing in the way and passing motions that make it harder for our educational leaders to contact parents and let them know why it's important for us to get that data. Because 3 years between data points, when you're hitting grade 10 and you have kids that are looking at graduation and looking at where they're going with their life, what does success look like for them after they graduate? We need to make sure that we're giving them every chance they have to have the supports they need. And if we don't have the data, that job becomes very difficult for us to know that we're spending our dollars properly. So I'm asking my colleagues to consider that in the future. I know it's political, I know it's tricky, but at the end of the day, not knowing where 40% of the kids are at in a grade 7 numeracy, that's a significant data gap. And I think we have to own a little bit of that data gap as well. It's not just COVID. So I'm just going to throw that out there today, even though it might not be the popular opinion. Thanks.
Yes,
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I thought you said go ahead, Scott.
yeah, I did, because I couldn't find my microphone.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Jackie. As trustees will appreciate, Jackie's presentation was largely a story about the usefulness of the FSA data. And so we included quite late in the day that letter from the First Nations Leadership Council that I thought I'd bring up right now, which is, I'm not going to get into it too much. We've talked about it before, but to be sure, it's rather strongly worded condemnation of the BCTF's targeted attack campaign on FSA assessment. And BC School Trustees Association also wrote a letter in support of that FNLC letter. And so staff find themselves somewhat caught in the middle. This assessment, of course, is mandated by the Ministry of Education, and staff will continue to advocate for full participation for students to complete the assessment to the best of their abilities, because that becomes a problem as well with how politically charged this thing is. We can't ever be sure if students are completing that assessment with fidelity either. So it's a real challenge for staff to use that information to resource any needs that we might see at a district level. So I just wanted to share that little bit about the First Nations Leadership Council letter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saywell. Charlene, did you have anything you wanted to add, or may I go on to my next speaker? Okay. No, that's enough. Okay, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thanks, staff, for the presentation and for preemptively answering some of the questions that I already sent in. I always appreciate that we're sort of in the, mind meld, which is scary for you, not me. But I actually sort of following up on what Chair McKay said. I actually looked at participation rates of the districts immediately on either side of us. And those participation rates are 10 to 20% higher than our own. So my question is, are the board motions, and I will, fall on this sword. I was one of those boards. I may have actually moved a motion. Do we think that those board motions are impacting our participation rates? And I'm not trying to put anyone on an awkward spot, because I know your job is to follow through on board motions, but I'm asking, and you do that, whether a board's going to pass the motion, like you guys are great at following through on the board motion. So this is not meant to make people feel awkward. It's meant to be sort of a dive into what causes our low participation rates. And some of those years that you mentioned also coincided with not just COVID, but board motions. And so I wonder if there is, has there been conversation with the districts on either side of us about whether they have board motions or what it is that they're doing to have participation rates in the FSAs that are so much higher and more robust than ours?
Through you, Madam Chair, if I could. Thank you. Yes, Trustee Higginson, the board motions have certainly have had an effect on participation rates. If you go back to the mid 2000s, where in some years, well, 2007, 2008, participation was at 90%, which was equal with the province at that point. In 2013, 93%. When we look about 2007 to 2000 to when we did our first motion in 2015, it's pretty consistently level with participation rates provincially. They drop after the board makes a motion. We slowly climb back up, and then when the board made another motion later on, they continued to drop. So again, staff will do their job, and we're hoping that trustees, oh, I should be careful. I'm hoping trustees do their job. Thank you.
I won't respond to that one because I do. I've begun to see more sides of the argument as someone who was part of those original motions in 2015, 2016. Now, I will say, I'm sorry, Steph, I've taken away I forgot to ask you first if you had a follow-up.
I do. I
Yes,
can wait
you
till
do
you're
your
done.
follow-up and I'll talk later.
Okay, so I just will say that I too feel that I made an uninformed decision a number of years ago because I have become more aware, and I'm really conscious of the fact that this is not the only piece of information. But when we are dealing with, changing students' life chances, we really ought to use every possible tool that we can and have every piece of information that we can at our fingertips. And utilizing this data at the local level to triangulate it, but also provincially, I think it's really critical. We're part of BCT, and it is, part of the BCT agreement to utilize this information for the reasons that are laid out in the FNLC letter. And just finally to say that that campaign that was referenced in the letter has very real impact. I have children, not mine, but parents who've called me to say that their kids were told on the playgrounds that their teacher will not like them because they're going to write to the FSA because their parents are making them write it. And that made kids cry. And so there is, when we talk about the politicization of the data and the misuse of the data, there's also other sides to this story that I think it's really important for us to make sure that if this comes before another board in another time, we have an election coming up, that we ensure that there's full opportunity for a fully informed decision. So I'll stop on that, but I do have other questions about the data that I'll put myself on the list for.
All right, and I'm actually going to stop myself from the comment I was going to make and put myself on the list for later and give the floor to Trustee Stanley.
Thank you. I'm wondering if I could get some information about why the reading and writing parts of the FSA were dropped for, well, this year, and I assume permanently.
Just ask her to re-ask the question. Yeah. So reading and writing were changed rather than a separate reading component and a separate writing component. They were combined into one literacy component. And so that was a format and a structural change. I actually can't speak to why because we found out when it was opened. So
yeah, I believe it was just to align the literacy with the grade 4, grade 7, and grade 10 and 12 provincial assessments.
Yes, Scott, you want to add something to that?
Just give that thumbs up.
No, that was a thumbs up. Or that
Sorry, Dawn beat me to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have a follow-up, Jessica?
More of a follow-up comment. So I'm somewhat hesitant to get into the mucky waters of the political aspects of the FSAs unless we're going to go for it, in which case I'd like to be more prepared. But, I am one of those parents that didn't want my child to take the FSAs, and largely it was because I looked at the rubric and I'm not confident in the measure. So I'm open to getting more information about the development of the measure and what the justifications are. But when I looked at the rubric for it, I was really shocked how simplistic it was and how, very simple variations can dramatically affect the assessment level of the child's functioning. And my concerns are, it's not nuanced. It does not reflect kids with learning disabilities abilities. And in our experience, the process of going through that of a gifted child that got a low grade on the FSA was devastating to their school engagement and their emotional well-being. And so it's not as simple as it's, you know, in my perception, it's not as simple as the current discussion, and that's why I kind of don't want to wade into this right now. But I will say that it was the reading and writing piece that I really reacted to when looking at the rubric. And I do have background in, you know, measure creation and evaluations of that kind, although slightly different than K to 12. So I ask if we're gonna tell us what trustees are right and wrong. And I say that lovingly because I can respect you all, but yet disagree, and here we are. I ask that if we are going to do that, then we have a more detailed conversation and a discussion, you know, about the FSA, about the creation of the measure, about, you know, why the rubric is as is. I'm happy to be, I'm happy to learn, and I'm happy to rethink my opinions. But I do need more information in order to do that. So I do want to say, you know, it's not perfect, and especially with families with learning disabilities, you know, which is not an insignificant portion of our students, and often they're undiagnosed, so it's actually a greater proportion than we realize. This can be a really negative and undermining experience, and so if we want to get into it, and maybe we should, then let's just do it with a lot more information. Thanks.
Okay, Stephanie, I do see that you're on to make a follow-up comment, ask a second question, but I saw Naomi come on and she'd like to make a comment, so she's not spoken yet on this topic, so I'm going to go to her. And then you're next, unless someone else pops on.
Yes, this is an unavoidable political topic, and I think for me, Jessica, you brought up a good point about the rubric. I was teaching a grade 4 class when they first brought the FSAs came into being, and back then it was very mandatory. For the students that were taking them, in my recollection in high school until they stopped doing them for the grade 10s, a lot of students didn't take the exams seriously because it had no meaning for them. Because those results are not taken back to the classrooms and gone over with the students. It's a piece of data collected by the ministry to see if, you know, the districts are doing their job. But what I did see, it's not so much the tests themselves, it's how these tests are taken and used by an organization to measure schools against each other. And it's had devastating effects on some schools and in our own school district, where our scores come up and parents see these scores and they don't want their students going to that school because they scored 926 out of 931 elementary schools in the province. That's where I think the bigger issue is how this data is used and pitting schools against each other, private school, public school. That to me is one of the bigger issues. And ironically, one of the schools that was really decimated over a number of years in our school district was a school that was comprised of 60% Indigenous students. And in a community where the school had been thriving in many other aspects. And if you took the kids that were actually working at grade level, they actually did very well on these FSA tests, but there was a large body of students in classrooms that were barely meeting expectations, and it affected the overall score. So I'm not a big fan of FSAs, and I'm just a little surprised that FNESC actually embraces this as a tool for measuring student success. I think we have other data that we can use in the school district. I know that we do assessments, and those assessments aren't mirrored in political controversy, etc. And I think there's a lot of work that district staff have put into these tests, and I think they're very valid and useful. But I'm willing to listen and to hear other opinions as well. So this might be something that we could discuss, put some time aside to have deeper discussions about this.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Naomi. You were thinking very much the thoughts that I was going to state myself when I put myself on the list. So I'm going to take myself off the list. I see Stephanie's got her hand up, and I'm going to go to her, but is there anyone who hasn't spoken to this topic who would like to speak first? Okay, seeing none, Stephanie, I'm going to give you the floor, and if anyone else has comments or questions, I will come back to you.
Thanks. I do have some questions about our own district data, but just following up on some of the comments that have been made today so far. I think an important part of the conversation that we would have is, what is this assessment and what is it not? Mostly it is not a test and it is not an exam. And these words get used interchangeably with this assessment, and they are different things. And it's incredibly disappointing that some of the letters that go home to parents categorize this as a standardized exam, because the information that's on those letters that go home to parents about standardized exams is true. But that is not what this is. This is an assessment and it's a tool. And it's really important for us as a provincial system, but also as a local system, to understand how our students are doing compared to other students. Particularly sometimes, Trustee Stanley, you talked about students who may have learning exceptionalities, and having information that is standardized information to allow how particular students who may be struggling in our system are doing when compared to other students is a critical point of measure for us to understand. And so I think that this assessment is not political. It is steeped in educational research and pedagogy and practice. So assessment itself is not political. And I think that that's really important for people to remember. And it's also important to remember that the FSAs themselves were developed by educators, by teachers from across the province. So this particular assessment has become political. And I think that's something that's really important for us as politicians in the system to wonder. And that's a wonder that we should have. Why has this assessment become political? I think some folks have just talked a little bit about it. It became political when it became something that was part of a ranking system. But have we allowed that to distract us, as has been said in the FNLC letter, from the valuable tool that it could be? And so I think that this is an important conversation for us to have, both as a board, but also as a provincially. And I think that there is another provincial assessment group starting, which is good news, because Jackie, when you talked about all those changes over time, it makes you dizzy. And in fact, what this province is missing, I think, is a comprehensive assessment program where each assessment is connected to the other assessment and allows us to make sure that throughout a student's educational journey from grade K to 12, we're able to have an understanding of how this student and how our system is doing. And so making sure that we have a comprehensive assessment plan that's linked to other assessments and not constantly making all these little tinkers like you were just talking about is really critical to ensure that we have the information that we need as trustees of the system to ensure that we're consistently improving the system, that our students are consistently doing better, and making sure we can understand how our struggling students are doing in comparison to other students is really important information. So that's my rant about that. And I will put myself back on the list to actually ask questions about our actual FSA information. Thank you.
Okay, Jessica, you've already spoken, so I'm going to put you on the list, but I have a question that I don't want to lose. If you don't mind, I'm going to take a liberty and just ask a question. Or is yours? Thank you. A question about data with the literacy. How many, basically my question is I can't pronounce that word, longitudinal data. How many years in a row do you need before you can, is it 3, 5 to make it meaningful? For trends, does anyone have a thought on that?
Doesn't have one, so we're asking questions.
Well, I mean, you can always start to look at it, but you'd probably want to have 3 to 5 minimally to kind of see the trend for sure. What we, the cohort data we would have to wait from grade 4 to grade 7, but I would say 3 to 5 would be minimal, like to be able to start to see those trends.
Okay, thank you. All right, and now I see Jessica. Jessica, I'm going to give you back to you.
Hi, thanks. Okay. I'm wondering if so among the students that participated versus those who did not participate, do we have the ability to look at the patterns in that? Like, can we look at the demographics? Do we understand anything about their performance? Like, do we have the capability to look at those groups and see if there's meaningful differences between them? And if so, what is that data? And what were the patterns, if we know it?
At the school level, they will of course be able to see, because they would have all of the specific students that were excused for various different reasons. So at that school level, they would have that. At the district level, we will just have the total percentage of students that were excused.
We don't analyze that data.
We don't analyze those that are excused because we don't. It's just a percentage.
Can I have a follow-up? Do we have any demographics or any information on those students that did participate that will allow us to have conclusions about those that have not? Like, is there any, besides the scores, is there any other additional information at a district level?
No, I think the purpose of the FSA assessment is to have ideally 100% participation, and then you're saying all our cohort of grade 4s, here's their results, and then 3 years later that cohort result. It's not meant to say if 55% of the students write it, do a deep dive into the demographics for what that 55% are, and a deep dive into the 45% that don't. The ministry's expectation is it's a wide, high-level assessment that allows districts over time to see trends and put in strategies and interventions to support it.
Okay, thank you.
And is there no follow-up? No. Okay. Stephanie, I don't see anyone else popping up on the list, so I'm going to let you ask your next question.
Thank you. So I just wonder, since our participation rates are low, and I think this is what Trustee Stanley was talking about as well, like, what else do we use? I heard we don't use report card data last week. Like school-wide rights. I know that at the school level, they're doing really good stuff. So question, at the school level, is there formative and summative? And second question, I'm sneaking them in. Do we get, like, what else are we using to triangulate to make sure that our district-wide strategies are working?
So at the school level, there's definitely formative assessment all the time. It's happening ongoing in the classrooms, and teachers also have summative assessments that they use depending on the grade and depending on what they're looking at. It might be projects, it might be observations, it might be tests depending on the subject area and the grade. Right now, as we mentioned before, we are working towards being able to look at report card data. Assistant Superintendent Tate would have shared back during the focus schools that we have that report card data that we can take a look at for the focus schools. We're just working towards being able to extract that data and look at it easier on a district-wide level.
That's through the chair. That's the disconnect, right? We've got loads of rich, formative and summative assessment happening in classrooms K-12 all over the place. Where the disconnect is getting some sort of indication from that data at the district level. And I know you've heard me say that multiple times. I just want to say it one more time because it is so challenging at the district level to roll that classroom type data up into something that is accessible to us on a dashboard or accessible to us in some way.
Follow up, Stephanie?
Well, yeah, I'm wondering how we can support you in that. I'm pretty sure that somewhere in our continuous improvement, trying to think of the name of the policy, of instruction and assessment policy, it actually states that the information will not be utilized at the district level. And I know that in other districts, there are school-wide rights that happen, both formative and then summative. formative to see what we need to work on, summative to see if it worked. And that information is rolled up and utilized as part of the triangulation along with report card data and FSA data, even in some districts where their participation rate is even lower than ours. So I'm wondering if we have, like, are there things that we can do or prioritize to support you in being able to access that data? And I don't know if it's a software thing. I don't know if it's a policy thing. I don't know. I'm just wondering, because it's valuable and critical information, like you've talked about. The richness of that data would help all of us help our students.
I think as a starting point, it absolutely could be a software issue. Again, I think that we have data points at the school level that are rich, or there are data points like, you know, deep diving into the report card data that is really labor intensive. We don't have a system to connect to MyEd that will allow us to pull in demographic information and cross-reference that with school-wide rights, you know, our numeracy assessment results, whatever those are. So I think as a starting point, it could absolutely be viewed as a software issue, and I would love if that could be the place where we could start.
Okay, thank you. Jessica with comments.
I just want to say that that question that Stephanie just asked, I think, is one of the most important questions of the evening, and one that I wholeheartedly support, and actually was going to ask something like that, but she said it better than I did. So I just want to point out that I think that's a really important conversation, and that I would love to see us continue that or explore that or understand how we can support you better in doing that, whether it's data mining or whatever process it is. I just think it's a really important piece of information, and so thank you, Trustee Higginson, for asking that.
Thank you. And Trustee Higginson, I see that you're on the list for another question. I think I'm going to, yeah, go for it, Steph.
Thank you. So specifically on our results, I know I'm getting there, putting all the politics aside. Numeracy, since we are allowed to talk about numeracy over time, it's concerning. So what are, like, I remember when my kids were littles and we did the daily 5. So it was a literacy, but you know, it was happening all over the district. Like, you walked into every school, it was happening. It was a concerted, focused effort. So I'm wondering if we have district-wide strategies on this. I know that the provincial levels are also a bit low. This, you know, is a new curriculum thing, all that kind of stuff. So learning transformation, I shouldn't call it new anymore. So I just wonder what information you're able to glean from it, if there's other information out there that has different results because of our participation rates making this information unreliable, but numeracy levels seem a little bit concerning.
Thanks, and I will speak to that through the chair. So absolutely, and it has been, you know, a goal probably for a couple of years, and I think pandemic did get a little bit in the way of kind of trying to tackle that. It is a piece that's being worked on quite significantly. One of the things that the coordinator team has been working on this year is creating some documents that are called Math Indicators of Proficiency that include a variety of strategies, resources, activities, ways that they can be approached in a classroom that we'll be able to provide back out to schools that will have, as well as resources going to our schools. With the goal of next year actually bringing teachers in and doing some in-service around what are the indicators of proficiency, what are some strategies and tools that you can use to get them there, what does it look like, how do we move them forward, looking at content as well as competencies. So wanting to make sure that we look at both of those aspects when it comes to math and numeracy, because there is a connect and a disconnect there when people understand those two. So I'm wanting to make sure that we're looking not just at, you know, can kids memorize their times tables, but also can they understand numerical concepts. So certainly looking at that, and work's being done on that this year and moving forward for a number of years.
Okay, so do you have a follow-up, Stephanie, or another question?
I have another question, but
is there anybody else who wants to ask a question before I let Stephanie ask her next question? Well, I'm going to quickly ask one. This new assessment group, I was going to say through the chair, but I am the chair. this new assessment group, this at the provincial level that Stephanie has referenced earlier, do any of you know when we might start hearing from them and how the board might hear back more about them? And yes, Stephanie, if I want to give staff a chance to answer, and then if you have a comment, you can jump in.
No, we'll turn it over to Trustee.
Okay, Steph.
Sorry, it's only like the first meeting's in 2 weeks, so literally
Okay.
like, and I'm not even sure that the information's sort of been properly put out through proper channels, that there's going to be sort of a mini AGPA 3. So
A mini what?
A advisory group on provincial assessment.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
I know our acronym hack here. So here's my other question on our results, and caveat, participation low, all those things. Are we seeing areas of concern that as a board we should be aware of and focusing resources on, and hearing from you on the strategies that those resources, what they should, what those strategies should be, or just, in general, what are areas of concern that you're seeing that we should be aware of and watching for improvement over time?
Probably the numeracy, but I think just hold.
You're muted. Laura, you got muted. There we go.
No, we're discussing it first.
Yeah.
I'll just jump in through the chair and then I'll turn it over to Jackie. Just that holding the line on literacy and numeracy, we have so many competing interests in the curriculum, in the world today, in the global sort of economy, etc. And so holding the line, obviously, Trustee Higginson has highlighted, as has Jackie too, the attention we should be paying to numeracy for sure, but holding line, supporting us to hold the line on numeracy and literacy, despite all the competing interests, just prioritizing those, I think.
And I have nothing to add, because that is an ongoing piece for sure. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Any follow-up to that, Steph? Nope, she's gone. Okay. Okay. Is there anybody else who would like to ask a question about our FSA results? Okay. Well, I'm certain that this is a topic that we will come back to in the future, in probably a broader manner around these sort of philosophical components. I think it's inevitable, but I'm glad that we didn't go there tonight. I think it's something that will come up in the next work plan. And so I'm going to thank you all for your work and for your presentation. I want to say how much I appreciated those graphs and how easily they were laid out as someone who's not always the best at understanding graphs. So thank you very much. I've appreciated that. And I'm going to now move on to the next item, the final item in our agenda. 8.3, Mark Walsh, our Secretary Treasurer, will be speaking to the 2022-2023 overview of our preliminary annual base budget.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be on actually fairly brief because the highlight of the evening is going to be our Learning Services team again. So the document you see in the agenda on page 9 is just a repeat of what we presented at the the Business Committee. And so again, that's highlighting the main assumptions that we have. So our enrollment that's driving the majority of our financial position, in addition to other aspects such as our international students, etc. What that's driving and some of the changes. So CEF funding is an example. A continuous concern year to year has been the idea that we've been funded at 90% of our CEF allocation. This year we'll be funded at 100%, and so that means less of an impact on our schools, particularly at the secondary level. So something that we've all been concerned about, and I think that's now been addressed. And then a number of changes with respect to funding, and I just want to highlight again that the removal of positions and funding, etc., that you do see in the document is associated with one-time funding items only. So the budget that we're talking about, or the budget that we're going to be talking about, we're in a position from a base budget perspective year over year to be investing back into the system for the very first time. Not the very first time, but investing back to the system in the April April, May preliminary budget, which is often quite rare. So I want to highlight again, we are taking some fairly conservative estimates with respect to our enrollment. We're seeing significant increases in secondary, minor increases in elementary, and we're tracking that day to day because they're a little bit soft as we speak. So it's good, I think, that we went the direction that we did with respect to that. The board will see the full preliminary budget outline. The 35-page document will be published on Friday for an initial presentation at the business committee. Our partner groups in the past have expressed concern about being asked to present kind of advance of actually seeing the budget document. And so what we've done is invited them to come and speak next Wednesday if they wish. And we've offered them an opportunity to kind of staff to staff kind of background questions so they're fully informed and feel they've got the information to be able to respond. So I'm happy to answer questions on the general issues that we'd previously presented at the business committee if folks have questions. But what I really want to highlight is the fact that when we left the board last, we talked about having a surplus of slightly over $300,000. And given that, the question was asked at the last board meeting and last education committee meeting, well, staff, okay, how are you aligning spending priorities with the goals of the board and the place where you see needs? And so here you will see the request for the expenditure of the surplus is focusing completely on learning services, and they'll be able to talk about that in just a moment. Two other things to note. One is we've just pointed out a couple of small tweaks in the learning services budget that shouldn't have impacts on staffing to fund additional items within their area priority areas. And then finally, last year we did just this a little bit. We do anticipate a surplus at the end of the year at this point, and our Q3 report will outline that coming up next week as well. But a couple of things to note. One is that in this budget, we have not included a transfer to local capital. So it's a good time to note that some of the ETAG priorities that were presented, technology, etc., is not being shown because we anticipate that in September, we'll be coming back to request that. That'll be the first thing that we'll be requesting. But because we're anticipating the surplus, what we didn't want to do is either put the budget into a deficit or not support learning services goals in the event that we knew that surplus was coming. And so you'll see that that'll be coming in September as an investment in that infrastructure and the technology that Mr. Murcher and Mr. Balcom were talking about. And then finally, we are suggesting that the board go into anticipated surplus to fund summer outreach as well. Now, I think I did see one question. I'm not sure, Chair, if you'd prefer me to answer the question or turn it over to Learning Services to highlight the additional expenditures.
Let's get the question first so that in case yeah.
I think this is me.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, Charlene.
Thank you. I have lots of thoughts that I'll save for later because I'm excited, but I'll start with my question. My question, and I apologize because maybe you're going to talk to this already, but I'll jump in anyhow. Elementary IST ELL allocation. My question related to that is to help me understand the educational strategies that are used in ELL and their potential benefit. Once we increase that ELL time in schools, I believe, and this is my question, I believe that there's an added benefit because those strategies that are used for things like literacy benefit the wider community as well. So I just want to confirm that my understanding in that is correct.
So perhaps through the chair, I could request that that question does get deferred because Learning Services is going to present the educational strategies focus of the recommended expenditures, the new expenditures reinvesting in the system, and perhaps can respond to that during their presentation as well.
Perfect. That'd be great.
That's all right, questioner.
Absolutely. It's totally fine.
Thank you. Okay. Then I will turn it over to the Learning Services team.
Good evening. So before I jump into the presentation that we prepared, which is specifically around the outreach and Tier 3 proposal that we have put forward, maybe I'll just speak to that ELL IST question because it isn't part of the slide deck that we prepared. So that proposal is we've taken a look at the level of complexity at a number of our schools and the volume of students that we're trying to provide support for. A couple of years ago, we've moved away from having standalone ELL teachers at many of our elementary schools. We certainly have people in the high schools. I mean, there's enough support being provided individually at some of the schools that it requires a full-time ELL person. We definitely have needs that shift over the summer. You know, we don't always know which families are coming from where and what schools they're going to arrive to. So we do have a small contingent of district staff that we deploy to the places they're the most needed in the fall. But we did at the elementary level work to combine the IST and ELL roles. And we did that on purpose to speak directly to the question that we were asked. There is a ton of overlap between really intentional Tier 1 classroom practices around front-end loading kids with vocabulary strategies, using more visuals in our everyday instruction, providing advanced reading to kids so they can get prepared for the bigger discussions that are coming in the classroom. The small group ELL support definitely focuses more on vocabulary building and comprehension. Our very early English speakers are getting like lessons in phonics and phonemic awareness much later than some of their peers might if they're new to English in grade 4, that you have to start at that place with learning how to decode and build fluency. But often we have learners who are not ELL learners who often benefit from those strategies. So we'll see places where very new English speakers get some very intentional separate. There are some specific ELL pedagogies that are really valuable with kids that are just getting started. But once they start to move along that literacy continuum with their peers, there's tons of opportunity for overlap and collaboration and grouping. And what we learned was when the ELL person came in, you know, like the year that I was principal at Ladysmith Intermediate, my ELL person came Tuesday afternoons. That was it. I had 0.11 ELL time at the school. It made no sense for that person to be the only one teaching English literacy strategies to our new English speakers. So we did find a meaningful role for her on that time, but actually over time it evolved into supporting those kids with a little bit of numeracy coaching, and the school's IST provided all of the reading instruction because the kids needed it more often and we had to really engage. So this request for the 0.51 that's been brought forward, what we're hoping is that we can use it now to supplement the staffing levels in the school. It's not actually for more bodies, it's to give a little bit more time to people who maybe aren't quite as full-time. We have lots of ISTs that have other responsibilities in the school. And if we're able to support this time now and put it out in our staffing, it means that we're not going to be band-aiding staffing in the fall to the same degree. So we won't have that Tuesday afternoon person. We'll have somebody with a greater FTE right out of the gate so they can build what they need across their school moving into the fall. It's probably not going to get us all the way there. We always have needs shifting over the summer, but I don't want to dial back staffing if we don't have to in some of our schools that have really beautiful things happening right now. So I don't know if there's follow-up on that or if I'm okay to dive into the conversation with Kirsten about the Tier 3 pieces as well.
Do you have a follow-up, Charlie?
No, just to extend my thanks. That's really meaningful, has the potential to help us shift and change and support kids. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
I agree. Thanks so much. Okay, I'm going to switch to sharing my screen then, and Kirsten will start us off with the conversation about our Tier 3 pieces, and I'll get that going for us here. There we go.
Super, thank you. So tonight I'd like to draw your attention to what has emerged as a particularly pressing need for us within our system. And that is along the lines of support and intervention needs for students with particular complex needs at a Tier 3 level. And following along with our theme of really working to recover and reconnect as we emerge from some of the restrictions that we've all experienced related to the pandemic, what we really are observing is that our students who have multiple and intersecting layers of vulnerability have really experienced a disproportionate and adverse impact from some of those barriers to access to their education throughout pandemic-related events. So what we really have looked at is our data from the outreach programming as well as our inclusion support referrals. And as I indicated, there really is a very apparent intersectional layering of some of those different types of vulnerabilities. And so what we see is a number of those students have complex developmental disabilities, but in addition, in many cases, these students with complex developmental disabilities are also coming from homes who may be experiencing gaps in really important supports for those complex needs, as well as perhaps challenges like housing and food insecurity, as well as mental health challenges within the family. So really a lot of multiple layers of those vulnerabilities. Throughout the pandemic, those students have really relied typically on our outreach and our inclusion support teams to maintain their connection to school. And so what we're seeing now, while most of our students really have rebounded in terms of their on-site attendance again with respect to accessing educational opportunities, many of these students with complex developmental disabilities, including autism, and particularly those with those multiple layers of vulnerabilities, are really experiencing tremendous difficulty in transitioning back into on-site school attendance. So related to this piece, given the complex and diverse needs that these students are experiencing, they're requiring really highly personalized access points for their education. And so to provide this, what this requires is collaborative efforts between not only homeschool teams, but also staff with specialized training and skills to be able to create intervention plans that are really wrapping around these students and also building capacity in those homeschool teams. And that, of course, is intended to be able to allow those homeschool teams to be able to create an environment that can meet those students' needs. So what we're looking at is really creating structures that offer the opportunities for staff to interact collaboratively to construct those highly personalized interventions. So tonight, what we'd like to share with you is a snapshot of some of our ongoing efforts in terms of how we've been addressing those challenges, as well as some vision looking ahead to coordinate and strengthen some of these efforts. And I'll turn it over to Director Steele for some of those pieces.
Yeah, so we just wanted to kind of summarize what it looks like currently. What have we been doing the last, well, really a couple of years since we started with the outreach structures towards, the middle part of last year. So we have outreach, support for students with barriers attending full or part-time. The services are being provided in home and community-based settings. And the services are being provided for students and families. So these are kids who we're not really seeing at school, but we have been able to connect with them in home and community-based environments. We've also been providing some transition support. So we have some students who have been supported through outreach. They're getting ready to come back to school, or they're partially back at school. But lots of the kids are out of practice, right? Like they haven't been with us for a 5-hour school day, 5 days a week for a really long time. And it's a really big lift to return to school. So some of our kids, in working with their families, they would like to come back. For some of them, it's an hour a day. Some of them, they can come for a half day, but they're exhausted by lunch, or they have other things they've been doing in the community, and counseling supports have finally started back up. So Thursday mornings, they're going to go do that. That kind of thing. So we've been trying to do some bridging, and outreach was providing most of that transition support last year, but increasingly we're seeing some intersection with inclusion support because many of the children who are attending hybrid programs now, it's not because their families were perhaps COVID fearful or had a barrier related to even some of our more complex things like food security and housing concerns, but actually it's that these kids are very, very complex, and they've had a lengthy period of time that their interventions and supports have been disrupted, and it's tricky to come back to school. So inclusion support is involved with those plans because many of them were involved with inclusion support intervention prior to the pandemic. And then the third band is, the inclusion support assistance that's out there. So it's support for students with intensive Tier 3 needs. Really, their role is capacity building for school teams to wrap around these very complex kids. And inclusion support up to this point really has only provided support in the school setting because their role has been to provide help to the grown-ups that are working with these kiddos. So those are kind of the 3 bands of assistance that we've been providing with these programs the last couple of years. And so I'm just going to share a little bit of information kind of by the numbers here. So if we look at the elementary outreach piece of this. Since March 2021, when we first began the program, we've provided support to 138 children. That's 138 individual referrals. In some cases, we went to the home to meet one child and realized we had 2 or 3 siblings that were all part of the package, but maybe didn't have separate referrals for them. And also, kids come with families, and we have lots and lots of parents that we've engaged with through this time as well. So you've got a little bit of a breakdown there around the grade level split in our elementary years. That's how many individual children in each grade have been referred. So we were at those numbers in the spring. We have 78 of those children also participated in the summer outreach. We had a couple of really interesting things that we observed over the summer. Some of the students had as many as 24 connections with us over the summer. So, you know, we had lots of kids who, because outreach didn't start till March, really our connection to them was just getting going and sometimes hadn't even gotten going by the end of June. And so that continuity over the summer was really significant and impactful for those families. And we had some of those 78 children weren't actually with us during the school year. We didn't ever see them. We had reached out during outreach. We were hanging our door knockers. We were texting and phoning parents and inviting them to activities. But actually it was when we opened our doors in the summer and the kids could kind of bring a friend and they'd show up at the door ready to go in the morning. Some of those connections began in July and August, and many of those children returned to school in September. There were 13 of the children of the 78 who had had extensive inclusion support involvement in the past, and so we were able to maintain a connection over the summer, do what we could to bridge them to services as things started to open back up, or find opportunities where services hadn't opened back up. And 4 of them were students with really complex needs who we actually, even pre-pandemic, weren't seeing at school very often. They came lots in the summer and we see them all the time now. So that's been really, really exciting. I think, you know, one of the things that was really, well, there were a number of things that were different about our program compared to a more typical summer camp kind of thing. But I think one of the most significant things was it was really low barrier, really, really welcoming, and truly was for everybody. So you didn't need to have a swimsuit, towel, food, a lunch, none of those things. You know, if you arrived with yourself barefoot at the door, we found you some flip-flops and made sure you had some lunch and really wrapped you in care and support. We also provided significant services to parents. So sure, lots of kids came on their own and interacted with our staff, but often at the end of the day, a parent would show up, or we would use walking the child home as a reason to knock on the door and connect with the family and just see if there's anything else we could do to help, or if there was any services like, you know, dropping off food and that kind of thing that we could help with. It was really, when I was talking to Lynn Brown, our manager of mental health and addictions, about it earlier today, she described it as wonderfully organic. It was just a really beautiful reconnection with the community that was really impactful for lots of families. Another population of kids that we didn't anticipate, but it really was a benefit for, were some of our new Canadian kids who don't have a lot of English. Online learning wasn't a super successful option for them. Some of them were very new to us, so even when we were back at school, we didn't see a lot of them. They had a really safe place to practice English together. They were making paper airplanes and giving each other instructions and painting them and figuring out how to do it. They were teaching each other playground games and chatting about Pokemon cards and, you know, things where kids just talk to kids. And so one of the things that the team noticed was that the English proficiency of some of those kids really picked up over the summer as well. The other piece is that we know some of the children before the summer, when outreach team went to visit them, were, you know, in the basement playing Fortnite for hours and hours and hours a day, and they spent hours a day at Fairview talking to other kids and playing and being out in the neighborhood. So we feel like some of our kids who were really at risk and highly vulnerable and had parents who had to go to work during the day had a really safe place to be. And we have had feedback from schools, from parents, and from some of the kids that point of connection over the summer made it a lot less scary to come back in September. So I can't give you numbers on that, but I can tell you anecdotally that is something that was observed at a number of our sites. So I feel like elementary outreach really got some legs over the summer. It was really lovely. Currently, we are supporting 44 students on our active caseload. In addition to that, there were 6 students who have successfully returned to school full time. I know that number sounds small, but actually it isn't, because we've gone from 138 to 44 who are not attending school through the outreach program. And those 6 who have returned full time are all students who have multiple complex needs, and there was lots and lots of worry about them, and it's really been working well. We have another 20 students in hybrid programming right now, so kids that are with us part-time but are still benefiting from the social, emotional, and mental health support that outreach is providing outside of school, bridging to services, practicing strategies for anxiety. We have a couple of kids that hybrid programming started by just trying to convince the kids it was okay to come outside for a little while. Quiet walks past the school happened, some of them after hours. You know, maybe the first visit was just to the library to grab a book, and now they're participating in classrooms and reconnecting with peers and things. And then we had 5 students who actually had come back to school and hadn't been referred to outreach, but when the school teams learned about some of the opportunities and things that outreach was doing, they're saying, you know what, this little person could really benefit from that. Like it's not actually working super well all day right now. You know, we have children that are they're really taxed by the end of the day, and it's really, really difficult for them. And so we've kind of snuck some kids into some outreach opportunities where it might have been a reduction of their school day and an integration plan. We've found ways to continue a full-time pathway for them because we've been able to connect with the outreach services. So I'm really super excited about the direction some of that has gone in. So now this is the busy slide of the night. I'm reflecting on the comment that was made about Jackie's pretty graphs, and this is kind of the opposite kind of slide. So I'll try to walk everybody through it because there's a lot of information on this one. Partly, I couldn't figure out another way to represent the complexity of the work that inclusion support does. There are so many pieces to their intervention and support for the system. So on the right, what you see is a table breaking down the number of referrals by grade level. These are just the elementary referrals reflected here. I didn't include the secondary ones because we're talking about the elementary tier 3 structure. One of the things that stands out for me right away is the number of kindergarten students that we provided some support for this year. We did a really intensive scan to check in on as many of our little kindies as we could because we knew there hadn't been preschool, there hadn't been speech therapy the way there usually is, occupational therapy, physical therapy hadn't happened the way it typically does. So that is a large number, but you know, we have had 167 children referred to inclusion support this year. As we move over into the tiered, I've taken our tiered model of support and kind of flipped the pyramid upside down because we really are having a tier 3 conversation right now. So while we do have kind of a red, yellow, green thing going about you know, a gradual release of support and moving along the continuum of intervention from inclusion support, all of the children that are represented on this table have tier 3 needs. So what the red represents are, it's really about the level of intensity of the inclusion support team around providing care to the school team and child. So we have, of the 167 students, we currently have 15 who are complex enough that inclusion support is providing intensive ongoing support, often multiple contacts with the school team on a weekly basis. The other population of students that we are really engaged with are, we have an additional 18 students at the secondary level with moderate to profound intellectual disabilities, and we do support those children in the elementary as well. They're just embedded in these other numbers. I felt it was important to reference that we do have a large population of students with really significant needs who need really thoughtful, intentional programming coming out of the pandemic. The 60 students in the yellow section, those are kids where inclusion support is still very involved. There's ongoing support for the team, but it might be weekly or bi-weekly contact with inclusion support. Plans have been created, routines have happened, some capacity building has happened, but the team isn't really feeling comfortable with all of the layers and shades of the program yet, so inclusion support's really alongside still. Perhaps the EAs on the team are still providing some coaching to the EAs at the school team to make sure everybody understands what's happening. Within that red and yellow band, so within that 75 elementary students, we have 15 students on integration plans attending part-time right now. We have 13 of those students are the hybrid students that we're talking about that are connected with outreach as well. 10 of those students have employee safety plans, so the support has involved nonviolent crisis intervention training, student-specific training for kids that are very complex. The team will go in and provide that. And then we have 7 students who had been referred to inclusion support and do require really intensive layers at school, but actually we're having trouble getting them to school right now. So outreach has stepped in and has picked up their care in a community setting. And then beyond that, we have 32 students who still have tier 3 needs, are still very complex students, but their programs are stabilized now. The capacity building has happened. The school team is feeling comfortable to manage that care without ongoing inclusion support assistance. So we're still available if a call comes and somebody wants to reflect something or, you know, pop into the office hours to have a question about something. We are doing that, but there isn't the same kind of ongoing connection with the inclusion support coordinators as there had been. We have 35 students we've been able to completely discharge this year. Things have settled down and the school team's saying, yep, we're good. We've got your consult note. Everything's cooking along. And then we had 18 students who were mostly in that kindergarten group who we did an initial consultation for, got them kind of set up with some things, and actually they really did a good job transitioning into their new setting, and so it didn't really become an ongoing referral. We did an initial consultation and then we're able to step out. So those are a couple of slides that kind of provide the here and now around outreach and inclusion support. What I'd like to share next is a little bit of information about where we'd like to go. So, and this really is the proposal that you're seeing from the surplus funds. What are we hoping to spend that $315,000 on? What we have learned with the complicated intersection between inclusion support and outreach, and kind of building the plane while we're flying it, as we've been doing kind of right through the pandemic, is our best support for kids happens when it's along a continuum. I think for a long time when we talked about support, and it's really tricky because we have structures that have served really well, some kids, most kids, for a long time, but we make a lot of binary decisions. Are we pulling in? Are we pulling out? Should we do this individually or small group? Is this child going to be at school full-time or part-time? Or if they're in there full-time, are they in the classroom full-time or part-time? It's a lot more complicated than that. And so really what we're trying to encourage across the system is, let's take the lid off a little bit. Just imagine if we could do everything we would like to be able to do for this child, intervention in a variety of settings, opportunities with peers in really meaningful ways, engagement with adults in ways that are really targeted and focus on the things that we need to be supporting. What could that continuum look like? One of the things that we know is it has to be a continuum that involves multiple environments, that focusing exclusively on the classroom or exclusively on the neighborhood school is too limiting for some of the complexities that we're trying to provide support for. So this chart does not capture the full gamut of opportunities. I love how Laura described it to me earlier when we were looking at it. We've tried to capture a few of the things that we would like to be able to do for kids, and the color in between is all the magic that happens when we're doing the planning and trying to just dream big for an individual child and figure out how we can support them. So what we want is a broad, flexible continuum of support and intervention. We want kids always to remain registered in their home school. We want them to have that connection to their classroom, their peers, their neighborhood. But we really want a way to be super intentional about the support we provide for them so that when they are in those environments, they have as much success as possible. So we want to think about this continuum as being really client-centered, really student-centered, community-based opportunities, connections to nature, a collaborative space for families. You know, some of our kids do better when somebody in their family can come with them for a piece of the day. A break from the traditional trappings of a typical school. We have kids who have super detailed plans, employee safety plans, response continuums. We've had inclusion support in their crafting environments. We've installed shelving and curtains and low lighting and plan schedules around PE so that you're never in the hallway when a class is transitioning. We never do anything hard when the announcement's going to be on because we know it's too hard for some kids to manage those kinds of things. The reality is, for some of our learners, if all of that isn't perfect, like, I mean, nobody flushes the toilet when it's unexpected when you're walking down the hallway, everybody's following the plan with the visual, with the adult that they know, if we make a mistake or we miss any piece, it leads to a really challenging moment for that child in the school. And so for some kids, we need to practice strategies in places where they don't have those additional environmental pressures while they build some stamina and capacity and then can go back to that environment. We also need collaboration with a multidisciplinary team. Our most complex kids, we need to be engaged with their medical team. We need occupational physiotherapy, our school psychologists, our speech language pathologists, mental health clinicians. There's a whole, some of our integrated case management meetings have 15 people at them for an individual child because of the complexity of their needs. So we're really looking for a way to involve meaningful collaboration with the family, with the school team, and with this multidisciplinary team in a whole bunch of different kind of environments: home, school, community, smaller school, quieter school, to be able to provide the support and intervention that the kids need. So our specific ask around the budget is to help us create an inclusive, it says Woodlands, that should have come off of there. We haven't actually made a decision about the site yet. That's an error, but we do want to have an inclusive ed hub available where we have not just the children receiving the support and the outreach and inclusion support teams together, although we do want them together, but it would also be a place where our specialist teachers for hearing and vision have offices, our community inclusion youth workers who are supporting our kids with transition to adulthood are there to support the continuum along the way. We have our augmentative communication team that support the iPad communication for some of our kids on site. So there's a whole community of people in the same place that understand all these layers of complexity and can provide some guidance and support to the planning. We have parents that have been asking for this for a while. They know that we're having a hard time wrapping around their children the way that we would like to be at school. And so I think this opportunity to create a multidisciplinary environment that's a little bit at school and a little bit outside can be really, really supportive. The other thing we're finding is that when we have to make a decision between whether it's outreach or inclusion support, and we're trying to bridge the kids between the two programs, it's really complicated to keep the lines of communication open. So we have done things like we have a thing we call Huddle, where we bring outreach and inclusion support together to do case reviews of some of the kids. Yesterday, I was at one of our elementary schools with our transition coordinator who's supporting the transitions for some of our kids going from 7 to 8 who are supported through outreach right now. And we spent an hour with the school team just figuring out who's on first, right? Like who's taking care of this piece and who's calling the parent and who's talking to the clinician. And that child's had, or some of those kids have had 3 or 4 case managers this year. So we just need to tighten all that up so that it's really comprehensive and aligned and we're all kind of saying the same things and having the same understanding. I know I'm sharing a lot of information. So one of the things I thought might be helpful is just to give you a little snapshot of the profile of a couple of students and some of the problem solving that's happened. So for example, we have a little one with complex autism who was with us in kindergarten throughout the pandemic, has been at an independent school and is now returning to us, but has really significant anxiety. So we had asked inclusion support, who knew this child 2 years ago, to help the school team create a plan to help him bridge back into school. We can't get him into the building yet. When he starts to come down the block and he sees the school, he bolts. He heads back home or to a playground or out into traffic. So we've had the EA and the behavior intervention role in the outreach team collaborating with the other members of the outreach team to try to figure out how to bridge him to school. It wasn't very long before we realized we'd better have the school case manager and the inclusion support coordinator involved because they understand what he's heading to and how all that's going to be structured. We have to build it together. Now we have kind of 3 people case managing pieces of it instead of having one person in charge. So we're kind of working through that. We have another student with a really complex neurological profile. He's in grade 5. He has always attended part-time. We just have never been able to come up with the recipe that looks like success for him at school. And I'm not saying this lightly. There have been literally hundreds of hours of meetings and student-specific NCI training and collaboration with his family, with community partners. He's at school every morning right now. It's working. He's bridging between independent or individual settings like a library or an IST room and the classroom. But we know that the data that we keep daily shows us that we have significant escalations and dangerous things happen after lunch if he's too fatigued and he's stayed in the building. So we have bridged him to outreach now. So he has a very fulsome educational program. Half of it's happening in the school, half of it is happening in community-based outreach environments right now. We have another student who actually wasn't with outreach, had attended all the way through the pandemic, but again, the complexities of being at school for him are such that we're currently paying an outside contractor to provide support in the afternoons because we didn't have a way to bridge him to a setting that didn't have 400 people in it after lunch. And we know that operating in that environment is too difficult, and something as simple as an extra announcement happening because there's extra pizza after hot lunch is enough that, like, people get hurt at school sometimes because it's really tricky for him to navigate unexpected things as his level of fatigue increases over the day. So our hope is that we have a way to bridge and support and wrap around some of the children that are part-time now in a way that's a more fulsome program, but is better meeting their needs and supports. So in looking at all of that complexity, we had a really deep, thoughtful conversation and reflection and data review, and really tried to take a look at the staff that we thought would be needed to support this program. Currently, the structure is that Lynn Brown, our manager of mental health and addictions, oversees most of the day-to-day operation of the elementary outreach team. I oversee the processes that the inclusion support team is engaged in. And then when we're trying to bridge the two teams together, we all come together in the same room. At the beginning, that structure for outreach was really, really successful because we were largely talking about people who had mental health barriers to coming back to school. It was fearfulness around COVID. It was some of the barriers around substance or food security or gaming in the basement and things like that. The manager of mental health and addictions is critical to providing that guidance to the outreach team. As the children started to bridge towards educational opportunities, not only is that not her expertise and background, but she's really busy doing the mental health support and providing that guidance to the team. It wasn't appropriate to ask her to try to provide educational guidance when that's not her professional training or role in our system. So we've tried a couple of different models. Last spring, I did step in and partner with elementary outreach. This fall, we tried to attach it to one of our vice principals at one of our elementary schools. That program was really complex and layered, and we just realized it was too difficult for that individual to provide the support that was happening with the children that he was responsible for on a day-to-day basis and the staff he was supervising, and have the flexibility that was needed for outreach. So we tried another school that was smaller and had a little bit less going on in terms of changes for the site. But again, it was a principal who had multiple responsibilities through the week, and we always seemed to be in this catch-up mode where we were re-explaining things, reconnecting information. So I have stepped back in and I'm partnering right now. But I'm still not part of the day-to-day work of this team. I still connect with them on a weekly basis, and they spend a lot of time explaining what's going on and trying to connect me to things. So we really feel it's super important to have somebody who's part of the life of both teams and is engaged in the work. So we're proposing a district vice principal of inclusive education. This individual will also serve as the teacher on the outreach team, so they will carry an active caseload and be engaged in the day-to-day work of the team. With the inclusion support coordinators, the EAs, and the CYFSW attached to this new blended program we'd like to create, the individual would be the direct supervisor of 7 staff members. There's also a lot of work that one of the roles that I've played the last few years is sometimes recommendations get made and school teams are really grappling with how to implement them. And sometimes that takes kind of a directive approach, right? I will sit down with the administrators at the school and we actually have to kind of draw some lines and provide some direction to the school team. That's not a role a learning coordinator can play. They can't have those direct colleague to colleague conversations. So they do rely on administrators to support that. And again, I've been doing what I can with that, but I think it would be a lot more impactful if somebody was part of the ongoing conversation and able to support that. We also have deliberately put forward the notion of a district vice principal rather than expanding the admin time for an individual at a school, because our 2 attempts to attach it to a school environment showed us that the administrators have so many moment-to-moment things in an enrolling setting that they don't have the flexibility that's needed. These meetings happen all over the neighborhood at all different times of the day. So you have to be really able to pivot and spend the time that it takes to sit in these multidisciplinary conversations. Just having a network and a relationship with the principals and vice principals is super important. We need this individual not only to understand the world of inclusive supports and the really intentional planning that's happening for these kids, and to be in part of the ongoing dialogue with the team, they also need to be part of the ongoing dialogue of what's happening across the district and what we're asking of our principals and vice principals, so that the structures and supports that we're putting in place are in alignment with the things that we're doing in schools and fit with the broader picture. So that's kind of my spiel. We're hoping that this district vice principal and manager of mental health and addictions can partner as the leadership team around this group of combined inclusion support and outreach coordinators, EAs, and child and youth care support people to provide comprehensive case management and kind of move us along on our dream of having this really beautiful multidisciplinary environment with this magic continuum that we're working towards. So maybe I'll stop sharing the screen now and then take any questions that folks might have.
Okay, so I see that Charlene had a comment, so I'm going to let her make her comment, and then we'll see if there's more any questions.
Thank you. Wow. I think the comment that I was going to make a little while ago has changed about 4 different times while you've been talking. So I think I'll focus on 2 pieces. The first is that over the course of the past several years, beyond just this term while I've been a trustee, the goal to set out this intention about continuous improvement of instruction, support for students, what does that look like? I feel like that's really coming to fruition right now, because what you're showing me is we learn and we shift and we learn and we shift and we learn and we shift. And here's our best case scenario for a strategy that we believe will support students in the best way possible. And so sitting here thinking about the proposals that you're asking us to consider, I think that growth in the system is really a significant factor for me that I'll be taking into consideration. So I just want to acknowledge that. That was a goal set out quite a long time ago, and it's coming true. So, strategically, that's really important to acknowledge. The other comment that I feel like is really important, but perhaps others may not see the connection, is around the summer outreach piece. I saw firsthand last summer students on the beach, a student that had never been to the beach, right? Lives in Nanaimo, never been to the beach. Those connections are actually vital to the success of our system, because we know, we've talked about our poverty rates lots of times. We know our socioeconomic status in this city has shifted and changed, frankly, for the worse. We know that there's more families facing homelessness and all of those other poverty-based concerns that we have for our families. And if we just walk away on June 29th or June 30th and say, okay, well, we'll see in September, we don't know that we're going to see them in September. We really don't. They could be living in their cars over the course of the summer and we wouldn't know. So that summer outreach program has the potential to ensure that we stay connected to those that are absolutely the most vulnerable in our system. And I think it's a vital piece that I'm really glad to see put in front of us today as a strategy you would like us to consider. It's something a year ago when I saw it firsthand, I said, oh, this is something that we always need. And I was very hopeful that it would be something that I saw come back this year. And so I just want to thank you for those connections, because I think that they're vital, actually. Probably some of the most important work is to make sure that we don't lose those kids. We've seen the impacts of the pandemic, mental health, with the well-being of everyone, our staff, our students, our families. Connection is the solution. So thank you. I look forward to our future budget discussions and considering the strategies that you've presented to the board.
Thank you. Okay, so I have Jessica on the list, Stephanie, and then myself, unless anybody else wants to add themselves to the list. I'm happy to bump myself down. Jessica.
Thanks. Thank you. So I'm feeling a little confused and I need some help. I'm not clear on what the like proposal is or what the asks are as far as the budget perspective goes. And maybe it can just be laid out clearly. I mean, I think there's a request for a district VP for inclusion. There's mention of 7 staff members, but then when you've got the list of the 4 inclusion support, 3 EAs and 1 child and youth family support worker, we're at 8. So I don't know if there's 15 or help. What are the specific asks outline for consideration?
Okay, so I can't count. It's 8. It is 8. So some of this stuff is already in the budget, right? Like the 3 inclusion support coordinators, 2 of the education assistants have been an ongoing budget. That's our current inclusion support team, our 4 coordinators and 2 EAs right now. We're looking at adding the district vice principal position, and then the other education assistant position in CYFSW were part of the additional monies for outreach, so they're not in the operational budget. That's the surplus ask that you're seeing. So the idea is that we would use surplus to create another outreach team to keep the outreach thing going, and then we would merge it with the existing inclusion support team, is what we're trying to do.
So make sure that I understand. When you say, so district VP clear, that's actually not clear. When I think you said that was in the budget. No.
That's part of the ask. So we're looking for this district VP position rather than currently we have an outreach coordinator. We feel that we need the level of support an administrator can provide. So rather than reposting the outreach coordinator position, we would like it to become a district vice principal position. That person will assume some of those teaching duties, though. They will still have an active caseload in outreach. And then we would like to continue with the CYFSW and education assistant positions that currently were funded out of surplus, right? And so those, we don't have those next year if we don't fund them out of this budget request that we put in.
Okay, so if I can have follow-up still. I just want to make sure I understand what's happening, what's new this year. I get the difference between surplus and budget. Are the ones that are in budget new to this year, but they're just included in budget? And then the ones that are surplus or are being proposed to be funded by surplus, are they viewed as temporary positions, meaning just for this year? Or are we looking at these as permanent positions that we're currently funding at a surplus?
Perhaps I can respond to that, Chair. So on page 13 of the agenda, what we'll see is the additional asks under the funded by budget surplus. Now, again, that is additional operating funds that would be ongoing. So it's not intended to be one time only in nature. It's intended to be a continuing expenditure. So normally at this time of year, we rarely have the opportunity to add to the base budget for ongoing expenditures that are in addition to what we currently have. And so that's what that is. And so, yes, we were able to fund some of the supports this year through the September one-time surplus. The intention would be is the 147, the 55 for the CYSW, the 46 for the EA, and then you'll see the IST ELL allocations and then the assignment adjustments. Those would be funded on an ongoing basis from the, I guess you would call it the structural surplus based off of increased enrollment and increased ISE revenues. The only item that you'll see there funded by restricted surplus, the summer outreach of the 5 CYSWs, that would be a one-time item that would be funded from a one-time surplus. So the 316, we call it budget surplus. It's, I guess, again, a structural budget surplus that will be gone the moment we put the dollars into the budget.
Okay.
Now, we
follow-up?
will
Are you-
still likely have surplus to be able to expend on other one-time district initiatives in September, but that is not what this is. This is an ongoing operating expense.
Okay, and so this is on page 13. Is that, just make sure I'm looking at the
Yes.
right table.
Page 13 of the education agenda. Oh, unless it's changed, but it should say learning services 22-23 budget priorities.
Okay, great. And sorry if you said this and I missed it. Which ones are new this budget, whether it be surplus or not, like compared to the current year? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so all of those positions currently exist, but except for we have a learning coordinator where we would like to create a district vice principal. But we currently have the same complement of people on inclusion support and we've had a couple of years now with those numbers. And then outreach, those were temporary dollars that we don't have access to after the end of June unless they're supported through this proposal. Our hope is to make them ongoing, though. That's why we're bringing forward the request. We are.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is that good, Jessica? Are you clear now?
That's a separate question.
Pardon?
I'm good enough for now. I'll have to figure, look at that.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie.
Thank you. So your slide mentioned an inclusive ed hub. And can you explain more about that?
Sure.
Please.
I'm saying sure, but we were still muted. Yeah, so we haven't finalized the site yet, but the idea would be that like right now, the outreach team kind of worked from their cars for a little while. Then they kind of perched in back rooms at schools for a little bit. So we ended up, currently they have a classroom at Woodlands that they're using. We have some team at Dufferin right now. Some of this team is at Dufferin. The OGCOM communication specialists and the inclusion support team is working out of the lower floor at Dufferin right now. The space that they are currently in is going to have a resource collection library built into it by the end of the summer. We're moving some things in there, so they need to be relocated. And then the community youth inclusion workers, am I saying that right? Mm-hmm. They are currently working out of their cars. One of them regularly does meetings from the special needs washroom at Dover because that's the place you can find Wi-Fi that isn't occupied by other people. So that's clearly not a go forward office. So we're thinking if we have to move a bunch of these people anyway, can we find a co-located place where they can have office space, where we can have a multi-purpose meeting kind of space so that if we do, one of the things Outreach has mentioned a number of times is that if they had a location where they could bring families together or have a bit of a drop-in place, they think they would see some of those kids and families more often. And we need a classroom. Some of the kids have really benefited from practicing in a classroom that is only 3 kids at a time while they're getting ready to go back to their bigger, more involved school spaces. And we just think that having the proximity of the specialists in the same building, I remember being in Family Place when I worked in the Qualicum district and I was walking past clinicians and psychologists and speech paths in the hallway, and the incidental learning that you do when you're having conversations is really beneficial. So what we're thinking is if we can find a location where these specialist offices can coexist with outreach and inclusion support, it's just a richer, more organic opportunity for collaboration that can only be a benefit to the kids is what we're kind of thinking. And lots of these people work in really siloed places right now. It'd be really lovely for them to have a community of colleagues around them as well.
So what we're talking about is more of a workspace hub and not creating sort of like a inclusive ed.
We want both.
I think we were just talking about the staffing, and so we went on to kind of a staffing.
Sorry, yeah. So we picture a number of office spaces. We picture an outreach classroom We picture a multi-purpose space that can be shared by kids and families. We don't picture any learners full-time at this site. The whole intent of this program is to bridge kids back to their neighborhood community schools. So they would stay registered in their school. But if there are interventions or opportunities or gatherings happening at this location that would be of benefit for them or as a bridging strategy back to school, we would have the capacity to set up classroom environments and provide other opportunities at this hub.
Okay. I have to say I have concerns about that, and maybe we just talk them through at another time because I'm aware of the time, but my concern is, should we be investing money into the schools that we don't seem to be able to make safe learning environments for these kids? Like, I'm fully aware that right now we have a square peg in a round hole situation when it comes to inclusive ed. And so my wonder is, like, we need to find ways to make our schools better places for students.
I think Stephanie just froze. Unless I just froze.
Yeah.
So I know that we've lost the back half of the question here, but let me take a stab at it.
Or to an opportunity for us when we have a bit more time to walk through with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So just my short version, before we can have the fulsome conversation another time, is yes, and I think. For sure, we want to work with our schools to make them more inclusive. We want to make sure that every child has every opportunity to be successful in their neighborhood school. The reality is our children come with a diverse set of very complex needs, and there are children who that's just not a developmentally supportive environment for all the time. It's too big. There isn't a way to be in a building with 400 kids and announcements and lights and weird smells and bells and all of the transitions. We can definitely do lots more in our neighborhood schools to support our kids, but there are children who require a level of intensive intervention that's a little bit more therapeutic and clinical in nature and a little bit less classroom. And that's just about their developmental needs. And we have parents asking us for that kind of support for kids that we are not able to provide necessarily in a school setting. I think we can do lots in our schools, and we're trying all the time to enhance that. We're also really full. Like, some of the space guidance that comes provincially, we can't create a bunch of little offices in a hallway when we're also having to create classrooms, and our schools weren't built for the kinds of pullouts and small group, but it's just different. So yes, we need to do what we need to do at schools, but I also think we will always have children who require something a little bit different, and being able to ebb and flow along a continuum rather than picking one environment or the other. I think it's really important, and it's layered and tricky and definitely not a short conversation, but we have to be able to wrap around all of our kids, and for some of our kids, what's best isn't 5 hours a day in a setting that's as complex as a regular elementary school.
Anything else you need to ask or add to that or comment on, Steph, before I move on? Or do you want to just...
I agree that the schools are currently not set up for some of our students. I just am concerned that it almost feels like a bit of a step backwards, because we're now talking about creating a space. If I'm freezing because I have really bad Wi-Fi right now, then someone wave their hand and I'll stop talking. But I know what we're trying to do, but my feeling is also that we need to round or square peg whatever the spaces in the schools as well. And that's my concern, is that we're not putting resources there, we're putting them somewhere else. And so I think we need just a little bit more conversation on this for me to feel more comfortable with it.
Yeah, I can.
No, okay.
And I agree that it's a bit of a longer conversation, because I'm not going to lie to you, I have a lot of thoughts as a person with a disability who almost got put in a special school, and would have had I not had a mother and father who said no, not doing that. And I don't want to get into my personal story right now. I want to say that I see both sides, and I think that this model has a lot of value to it, and I'm actually quite excited by it. Is there anybody who has any further questions about this particular topic or any other questions that hasn't been on the list yet before I get to Jessica, who has a question that is on a different matter? Oh, yes, Laura.
Chair, if I may, just to add to that piece and to address your comment, I think it's really, we want to be really clear that what we are proposing here is the opportunity for a very planful, multidisciplinary intervention. We're absolutely focused on bridging the students back into their home school and really looking at making that possible for them. So we want to be very clear, this isn't about a distinct placement or a separate segregated setting of any kind. This is really focused on operationalizing inclusion, but in recognition that currently we may not have the schools as they exist right now, the spaces and the staff capacity may need some work, and we need to engage in that work in a very planful way. So that is really the intention of the proposal.
Absolutely. I think it's, I think that's great. I see Jessica or Steph. Do you have any? Oh, Steph's gone. Okay, Jessica. I don't see anybody else on the list, so.
Wow. We could be on this list. This could be like a whole weekend. So I want to be on the list a bunch of times, but I'm also recognizing that, declining capacity. So first off, let me say, I want all the money because I want to do all the things. And I feel like this is a bit of a heartbreaking conversation in the sense that I have concerns that we have schools, and I can think of a school in particular, but that is not thriving, right? It's not. It's actually in like disarray. And so I was going to ask about focus schools, and if we looked at focus schools and what did we consider, and although I want to know that, I want to know if we looked at our schools in general and looked at their vulnerability indexes and looked at what's happening in them and the challenges and evaluated whether or not we saw a need for additional support from that focus school perspective. So did we review that from the schools? But why am I asking this is because, and related to this other conversation is, which needs do we meet? And that's where my heart breaks, right? Like, I want to make sure that our schools are thriving. Or at least, not at the point where, to be honest, every time I head out into the community, I have people telling me that they're leaving the school or going to be, or considering leaving our local school. And I don't know what to do with that anymore. So from a budgetary perspective, I hear the value of what you're saying, right? I hear that we really absolutely, from a district perspective, from a provincial perspective, have not adequately funded the mandate of inclusion, and you're trying to propose a way to do that better. So I guess what I'm trying to communicate is I feel really stuck in that, like, I want to do other stuff. I value this, but I guess I need to check my assumptions. Or get information about my assumptions or what I'm hearing from the community at least, and ask that original question. So very roundabout, sorry, but it's just want to explain the dilemma that I feel. Go back to that focus school conversation. Did we review the schools in the district with vulnerability needs and functioning levels, and to evaluate whether or not we see any other elementary schools as needing to be evaluated or needing to be elevated into that status?
And I don't know who amongst the team wants to take that question or how you guys want to address that.
So how we've evaluated which schools become the focus schools are based on the BC Vulnerability Index, the BC EDI, report card marks, Indigenous student population, on reserve populations, and then we use that data to then, I hate to use this word, but just to kind of put them in order of most vulnerable to least vulnerable. And we are limited by funds. Trustee Stanley, I feel what you're feeling. I can see it in your face. I'm feeling the same. There's so many priorities, and it can be heartbreaking. And so we have financial constraints. We have focus schools they require a significant amount of funds just to operate the 6 that we do have, 5.5 to 6 that we do have. So we haven't at this stage considered growing that at this point.
Can I follow up?
You may.
Thank you for the clarity on, sorry, I'm totally losing my voice. The clarity on haven't considered growing that. And I appreciate your empathy in the challenge. I'm sure it's something that we share. Have we evaluated whether any additional schools would even meet criteria?
It's not criteria. It's if we sort of think about the 28 schools, sort of put them in order. I hate to use the word rank, but we have to kind of rank them, from most vulnerable to the lesser vulnerable. So everyone can meet the criteria, or nobody can meet the criteria. So it's just a matter of, if we injected several more million into the project, we could, right? It's the same. It's coming back to your same compassionate dilemma. It's balancing, and what we're noticing at the moment within the realm of $300,000 is we have not a lot, but a significant enough number of learners with such diverse and complex needs that we're really struggling to give them a beautiful experience at school that they deserve. And so we're looking at putting some measures in place to address some of those needs, put a bit of a salve in place, and work on transitioning them back to school, while at the same time making inclusion an absolute priority across the district from a tier 1 level, so that schools can be safe, welcoming, warm places for all people.
That's lovely. It is. I feel really sad about the state of one of our local schools. And honestly, every time I go out to an event in the community, I have parents telling me they're going to be leaving the school. So I want to put that out there because I really feel like it's needing some help. And so I recognize the challenge, and I value inclusion. And I think you know that. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of that. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
And I'm going to piggyback on that, and I'm going to make a pragmatic, somewhat, what's the word? I'm going to call it pragmatic. Some would probably call it mercenary. My concern is, one of the concerns we have to have is, if we have situations like the situation Trustee Stanley just described, and people leave our system, from a financial perspective, that hurts us. And if stories get out of the community about, oh, don't go to that, that from a purely mercenary financial perspective, that hurts us. And then we can't fund these kind of things that we want to do. We want people, if they're moving to this community with children, to choose the public schools. And I just passionately, firmly believe in public education. I don't believe that people, I believe that children should be educated in the public school system. So on some level, we have to figure out a way to have some difficult conversations, maybe as a board, about what do we do when we see a school that is consistently having those kind of problems and concerns, as what Trustee Stanley brought up. And 10 to 9 tonight. I don't think tonight is the time to have it. But it's just something I guess that we as trustees want the senior admin team to be aware of, and maybe you guys can talk amongst yourselves about a way that we can further this piece of the conversation and where the best time and place is to do that. Is that fair? Yeah. Okay. All right. Stephanie, you have a question.
I think sort of taking Trustee Stanley's comments to this sort of higher budgetary level. We're being, you know, we've got $330,000 or whatever the number is. Sorry, it's late. And we're $316,000 and there's a proposal. But yet, as trustees, we hear consistently about the impact of focus schools. So we have a strategy that we've used consistently for years in our district. We've heard that it works. And I think that there's an apples to oranges conversation here that we're talking about. But I think as a trustee, what I look for always is, you know, why this over this? And so when we have a tried and true strategy that works, why are we not taking every opportunity we have at every moment we have to spread that strategy to every school that we possibly could, versus this particular strategy that you're proposing to us as a use of the dollars for this 1 year? Because you know, maybe next year the number will be different. I don't know, but we have $316,000 that's unallocated so far. And I think perhaps from the perspective of a trustee, what I need to see is like, what is the impact on student learning? That, you know, how do we know what we're saying to be true and why are we proposing it? And so I think that's where the next conversation needs to be is why one strategy over another strategy that we always hear about as being very successful. And perhaps, you know, I'm very aware of the time. I know that you folks have worked a longer day than I have, and I think we're all a bit fully cooked right now. But I think perhaps the next conversation around this allocation should be around sort of what, you know, how do we know it's going to work, and or not how do we know it's going to work? Because we don't know. I get it. We don't know. But, you know, why are we proposing one strategy, and what are the data points that show us that this is the best strategy to propose?
Okay. So I think you're right, it's apples and oranges a little bit, and it's a much bigger conversation. Many of the children that we're talking about who are accessing outreach services, who are part of referrals that come to inclusion support, who are attending on part-time programs because it's so very difficult to provide for their needs in a full-time kind of way at school right now. A whole bunch of these kids are at focus schools. We are talking about a different need. We're talking about children who either have significant barriers to attendance, and the outreach model is critical for reaching them in the places they are because they're not at school. So we need to go find them home in community and provide the support in those environments. Or they are not kids who will come to literacy, numeracy learning in a way that their peers are going to. These are largely children that are on functional programming that are operating a number of years behind their peers. Some of them have such significant developmental complexities that they are going to be on the Evergreen Leaving Certificate pathway. They are not dogwood bound. So we're talking about not just kids that need a different learning approach, but actually the whole curriculum is being personalized for them, and our way of delivering it and implementing strategies is completely different. So it is apples and oranges, but it's also expanding the focus school model or doing focus school kinds of things in other places won't meet the needs of these children because they have different needs completely. So it's just really trying to reach out and support a population of students that we're not able to wrap around the way we would like to right now. And yes, we want to keep going with literacy interventions and universal classroom programs and all of that stuff as well. It is really difficult, but we're really worried about it. It's a small population of children, but they're the most vulnerable, complex children in our system. And we just want to do better in the layers that we can provide for them and the interventions that we can wrap around them with.
Stephanie, another.
Thanks.
thought?
Well, I guess my follow-up in light of the time is just, you know, I think it's important to hear what Trustee Stanley was saying about pick any school. What are we doing to maintain a level of consistency among our schools that makes sure that the communities they serve are competent in them? And it sounds to me like we have a school that is not meeting that need. So what processes do we have in place that when we hear these stories, it's not news to you? My hope is that what Trustee Stanley said tonight is that it's not news to you, and the school she's speaking of is on your radar, and that there's a process in place to be able to address those needs, as well as address the needs of these students that we're speaking about. And perhaps that's the conversation we need to have, is how do we make sure that we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul? I don't know what the right term is, but how do we make sure that we're able to serve the needs of folks? And I am very aware of the you can do anything you want, but not everything you want. But it sounds to me like there's some conversations around ensuring consistent levels of programming in communities so that we don't have people leaving our school system, while also making sure that we're developing the best strategies possible to meet the needs of these students that you're also speaking about. Because the complex students that you're speaking about, you know, this is a critical aspect of the learners we serve, and we have a responsibility to meet their needs. We also have a responsibility to meet their needs in their community school. So it's a really good conversation, and I think they are very intertwined.
Okay. Wait, I'm looking at the time and I'm seeing it is 9 o'clock and 5 minutes to 9. Is there anything that anyone has just got a burning need to ask or put out tonight? Or, okay, I'm going to give about 30 seconds. Okay, I think that's enough of an uncomfortable silence. Oh, Mr. Walsh.
Oh, I was just going to perhaps just close the budget piece to
Yes, please.
get everybody prepped. So again, thank you for the opportunity to present some of this information again. Just want to express appreciation for some of the questions that we had in advance. Everything still getting publicly discussed, but it definitely does give us an opportunity to look ahead a little bit. The one piece about the budget I will probably remind you, and I think I said it at the business committee, is that one thing you don't see in this budget is recommendations on significant reallocations of dollars to create stability as we come out of COVID. Last year and the year before, the staff presented some potential reallocations that were definitely not something that the board was interested to try to focus on some goals. And so you're not really seeing that, with the exception, I think, that a couple of small minor shifts in learning services. And as we noted, we are having a retirement in finance. Some of the dollars going to support administrative needs and some of the dollars going to support learning services as well. So just that was another not philosophy, but I think commitment to create some stability in the system that you will see in the budget. So just something to contemplate as trustees get ready to grill us with the main document, and look forward to it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, on that note, I want to thank staff for their presentations tonight. I think that you've given us a good start for our, sorry, Steph, there's something you want to add? I should have asked. Okay. You've given us a good start to dig through the budget in preparation for digging through the budget documents and having our next discussions. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the questions from everyone. And at this point, as we have no correspondence and no unfinished business and no new business, I'm going to see if there's any questions from the audience. Okay, and I see a motion to adjourn. There are no questions. So given that there are no questions, I will accept the motion to adjourn from Stephanie and seconded by Greg. Okay, I think we're adjourned.